Hello, hello guys.
Who are you? No one of consequence?
Hey,
I must get used to disappointment. Hey,
Despite players, data miners, modders, and lore enthusiasts going at Skyrim for a really long time, without anything later in the Elder Scrolls timeline, there are still plenty of unanswered questions. Some of these include: what is the Eye of Magnus actually? Who is Maik the Liar really? And where are all the toilets? Do the people of Tamriel just take big steamy dumps in the middle of the street? Give us some answers here, Todd. It's the least you can do after not giving us the Elder Scrolls 6 in 15 years and potentially not in this decade. Still, the first two are meant to be intentionally mysterious, with the Eye of
whoa,
Magnus being
love,
something we probably
whoa,
can't
love,
comprehend in a sort of
whoa, love,
cosmic horror kind of way,
whoa, love.
without all the tentacles, and with Maik being a bit and kind of Easter eggy character. One mystery that has always bugged me is the friend that has been writing the Dragonborn letters and telling them about the words of power dotted about Skyrim. Who are they? How do they know where all the words of power are? And why are they trying to help the Dragonborn? Well, let's all put our elephant hunting hats on, do our best English accents, even though I already have one, and do some
That's
detective
fine.
work. Before I bring up some candidates, let's have a look at the criteria needed to potentially be the Dragonborn's mysterious friend. Now, this only starts after you defeat your first dragon and complete the Dragon Rising questline, in which you are discovered to be Dragonborn, and basically continues until you get every single word of power. Whoever this is doesn't want you to know it's them, or at least doesn't want people who can potentially read the letter before you, like the courier or anyone intercepting the courier, to know who they are. They also must know enough about Skyrim and the Thu'um to locate these word walls and point you to them, while having a logical reason as to why they want you to
Go.
get stronger. Now, let's get to obvious names out of the way and why I don't think it's them. The new blades, i.e. Delphine and Esbern, and the Greybeards. Now, Delphine would have all the information about the Dragon Cult and potentially where these word walls are once you raid Bleak Falls
The
Burrow for
what?
the Dragonstone. The Dragonstone has the location of many dragon burial sites, and could potentially have all the information you need to find more word walls. This happens before you face your first dragon, so the timeline checks out, but the letters don't stop when you have a disagreement about Parthenax. She and Esbern want nothing to do with you if you don't slay our wise scaly boy, but you still get the letters from a friend. The letters are said to be from a him, although I'm going to somewhat disregard this since a middleman could have been used. Delphine has connections and has often got people to do some extra work for her, like Malborn when we needed help in the Thalmor embassy. Now, the points I've made for Delphine are largely true for the Greybeards too. They will disown you if you slay their master, yet you get letters all the same. And the Greybeards don't need to hide that they want you to become more knowledgeable of the Thu'um, and will straight up tell you where to find more words of power if you ask. With the way that they live as well, I don't see them enlisting couriers for extra help, when they can just shout at you from across the world. So I'm crossing them off our list as well, but I am of course assuming that the continued delivery of the letter from our friend isn't an oversight from Bethesda. Now, let's get into some of our suspects, but I'm going to start with a pair of kinda jokey options. One is Maik the Liar. Yes, this cat with his pants on fire is back again. Now, because we don't really know who Maik is, there's nothing to disprove him being the friend, since he clearly knows a lot, even if anything he says is a bunch of baloney, allegedly. Also, if Maik in Skyrim is the same Khajiit we've seen throughout the Elder Scrolls series, he could be some cosmic being, an avatar of a Khajiit deity, and so on, trying to save everyone from the end of the world by helping the Dragonborn. I don't think this is the case, but I can't disprove it, so, moving on to the Courier, or I guess the Couriers. Now, the Couriers can find you no matter what. I'm putting it out there, these guys put New Vegas Couriers to shame, because even with the Civil War, bandits, wildlife, and whatever Marak's trying to do, they always deliver. And it doesn't matter where you are. Collectively, with their travelling and ability to hunt you
5
down, they could
minutes.
probably get the information they need to locate the words of power. The couriers could be using the front of a friend to hide from the Falmor
Negative
that they are
30.
helping you in the hope of making you a true hero that Skyrim needs. I mean, if you're trying to deliver mail and dragons are chasing you, you would want that solved as soon as possible. I don't think this is meant to be the case, however, since the couriers being this good at their job is more so due to Skyrim's game mechanics, and less so because of the lore. There's no way these guys can find me in the throat of the world when I needed the clear sky shout just to get here. I mean, come on. Unless they're hiding something. I don't trust the look in their eyes. Anyway, enough pussyfooting, and yes, for my non-UK viewers, that is a real word. Let's get into the real suspects, beginning with someone you might not have heard of. Fultheim. The name might ring a bell if you've done the Dark Brotherhood recently, since this is the guy in the same inn as the Gourmet. Now, the most remarkable thing about Fultheim is that he has a blade sword, and according to Hadring, the innkeeper of the Nightingale Inn, Fultheim is drinking away a lifetime of bad memories. These memories probably have something to do with the trauma of seeing fellow blades hunted by the Falmor.
I said, hi
Although
Joe.
Fultheim might
Hello,
not be as down and out as we might believe.
hello,
He still
hello.
brandishes his blade sword, and the Nightingale Inn seems to be the place where those wanting to hide their identity go to. Just look at the Gourmet. Delphine also stays in an inn when in hiding. That's a lot of inns. And while I do believe the whole drunk thing isn't an act, perhaps a bit of fire gets lit in Fultheim's belly when he hears the news of the Dragonborn's return, using his old connections to help Skyrim's newest hero. He's got the reasoning and potential connections as an ex-blade, and it's highly likely that he is an ex-blade. Sorts like his aren't easy to come by.
Hello.
Still, someone being a drunk for as long as Fultheim probably has, even as a former blade, does make him getting all the information to be the friend from the letter a little tough to believe. He isn't essential, and if he does kick the bucket, the letters won't stop. So while Fultheim is a great candidate, it probably isn't him if we use Skyrim's game logic. Now, while I didn't see a lot for this one, I did see a theory that Kimlet, the guy who delivers food to my Hrothgar, could be the friend in question. He could have the motivation, given that he probably grew up beneath the Greybeards and has been delivering food for them for a while. Maybe this stems from a deep respect for the Thun,
Couple man
and
lang
leads
ang
to him
break.
wanting to help the Dragonborn, possibly even acting as a middleman for the Greybeards, but I don't
May
know
naglalaro
that.
sa ano,
The Greybeards
server
have no need
console
for a
command.
middleman, and Kimlik himself says that he's never been in the monastery, but doesn't want to let them down. So the respect is clearly there.
What if
He also
pinuntahan ko
pays
nga
you a
talaga yan
lot
eh.
of money to deliver the supplies on his behalf, and could be secretly loaded, using his cash to help the Dragonborn. But again, Kimlik is only essential as long as the Book of Love quest remains
Kuha tayo ng
incomplete,
fishing
and
rod.
letters keep
Kailangan
coming
natin
even
ng
after
cord.
his death, meaning he has the same problem as
Or-
Fultheim, so let's move on. I have also seen some people suggest that Farangar, the court wizard of Whiterun, is the friend from the letter. He is yet another character
Si
that
Pops.
isn't essential, at least
Si
not
Pops
after
naglalaro
the
daw
Book
siya
of
ng
Love
ano.
quest. So Skyrim's game logic is
Yung
getting in the way again.
may
But
92
he
sa
would have
server
the
console.
resources. We get to the Dragonstone for him after all, and he's the court wizard
Ngayon
of one of Skyrim's
will do
richest
good
cities.
sir.
He's also overtly fascinated by dragons, so he's wanting you to
Diyos
become
ka.
stronger through learning more of the dragon tongue.
Pag yan
Could be
talaga
powered by this
pinuntahan ko.
fascination.
Tapos
Still,
in-spawn
my
mo,
counter for
maiinis
this
ako.
would be that he doesn't seem that interested in you specifically.
Okay,
Nothing in his
cod.
dialogue seems to imply that he cares about Skyrim needing a hero, and really only cares for his research. He also doesn't have much of a reason to hide his identity. Sure, your existence is a threat to the Falmor, but Farangar is a court wizard. He's got Jarl Bargruff's backing, so realistically, what is he to fear? It's an interesting theory, and it certainly could work, but I don't personally think Farangar fully fits the friend from the letters. While Whiterun's court wizard is a bit of a mundane suspect, perhaps the most bizarre theory I have is that once
Ay,
in the Elder Scrolls
19
before
pala kailangan.
unifying, this is what dragon breaks can cause, and we physically see one in Skyrim. Perhaps this
Kulang
future
pa ako ng
alternate Dragonborn is from a time where he wasn't as successful in his endeavours. Maybe he couldn't beat Alduin, or Marak, or maybe even Harkon, although I doubt that because, in the words of Tyson Fury, Harkon is a bit of a dosser. Either way, sending us letters as a friend would help us get stronger, and maybe hiding his identity would stop the dragon break from getting even worse, although I'm actually not sure that's how dragon breaks work. This would make even more sense if you believe the theory that the Dragonborn are Shezareen, essentially a mortal incarnation of Shor/Shazar/Lorcan, he's got a lot of names. Shezareen of the past are known to dabble in some time travel. For instance, Pelennor was said to be a Shezareen in the Song of Pelennor, and he was giving away Elder Scrolls spoilers like crazy, shouting Remen's name, an emperor who would appear thousands of years later. To be honest, I can't disprove this theory because I've got no evidence for or against it. It's feasible, sure, and Bethesda does like the Elder Scrolls to be one of the wackiest fantasy universes out there, but I don't think it's the one that makes the most sense, purely because it just seems way too out there, for something that seems to have a more simple answer.
Who are you? You. No, not me, you. Yes, I'm you. Just answer the damn questions. Who are you? I have told you.
For me, one of the most convincing suspects is the Ebony Warrior, the red guard clad in all black, who comes to challenge the Dragonborn in the hopes of going to Sovngarde. If the Ebony Warrior is to be believed, he has the resources and the training powers to know where potential words of
Damn.
power are,
Hey,
and the
may
means to pay for more
Oh my
investigating should
god.
it be needed. He also has access to the voice, being probably on par with someone like Ulfric or the Thun, who had 10 years of training with the Greybeards. It states that he's basically done everything there is to do. It was real quiet when the dragon, vampire and Marak crises were a thing, but whatever. He also only appears when you are level 80, and if you know how powerful the Dragonborn is in the lore, or need some reminding with this video here, it is implied that the Ebony Warrior is the closest thing you have to an equal at your strongest. Considering he doesn't have the cheat code that is your dragon's soul, it would have taken the Ebony Warrior a lot longer than the Dragonborn to reach this level of power, and not having an equal probably made him feel like Saitama until he heard of the Dragonborn. It does make sense for him to try to make the Dragonborn as strong as possible, through the guise of a friend through letters. This way he can sit back, watch the last Dragonborn grow, and once they've proven their power by essentially doing everything in the game, the Ebony Warrior will step in to challenge them. Now, the Ebony Warrior is obviously not essential, and if there are still words of power, you're still going to get letters after his death. But it does feel like he's the final hurdle for the Dragonborn, and is meant to be done once you have all the words of power possible. The only reason why this isn't my favourite candidate for our friend is that we don't know too much about the Ebony Warrior. Sure, he could be what you see on the tin, a great adventurer who kept getting stronger and just wants an honourable path to Sovngarde, but there are quite a few theories that he's something more. One of the main ones is that he is Raymond Eberron, the God of War. No, not that kind of God of War. Go away, Kratos. He seems to be more of a minor deity, or a hero saint from the Iliac Bay, known for wearing ebony armour, and having an ebony sword fused to his arm. This
This.
description almost suits the Ebony Warrior,
Okay.
and perhaps he is an avatar of this
Pin
god,
check.
or a reincarnation of the original saint, similar to how
Okay,
Lena
good,
Reverine is the
good, good, we good, we
reincarnation
good,
of
we good,
Indra
we
or
good, we good,
Nerevar.
we good.
And that would explain why he's so powerful. His motivation could just be sheer boredom. And because Ebernon was originally pictured as a Nord by the
Kung
developers,
nandito ka, Joe,
perhaps this
lalagay
could
mo
explain
is
why a red guard like the Ebony Warrior
equals,
seeks
equals.
Sovngarde. Then again, I'm not convinced Bethesda thought about this and probably just have the Ebony Warrior as a very strong adventurer. Even then, he could still be
Pin check.
our friend. I mean, it's not like letters have to be sent by some godly saint warrior. But there's a lot of question marks around the Ebony Warrior, and because he's a bit of an arbitrary character, I'm not so convinced that he's our friend from the letter. So, after all my research, that leaves me one name.
Okay, tara.
Before I get into who I think is behind the letter for a friend, I need to talk about a feature around found the letter
Nice
that I've omitted
elixir.
thus far, because it doesn't really
Lot,
make much sense. You
just
see,
a
the letter is
lot.
obviously a template that is just filled in each time, and here's the template itself. Now, whenever you use a shell in a area, it's around this one, so this is the area you created stir. When I say any named area, I mean any named area. This includes the bloody soul carrot and apocrypha, which, mind you, are Oblivion realms. Now, this could just be how the game is coded, and Bethesda could have been lazy, meaning that, lore-wise, there shouldn't be a way our friend knew we caused a stir in the Oblivion realms. Having said that, there is an off chance, however slim, that this was intentional. And if we're taking
Dungeon
everything
doors
about the
open.
letter from a friend literally, including this, whoever is behind it will keep giving us letters until the cows come home, no matter what, and no matter where. And there is one name that seems the most likely for me. Hermaeus Mora. Hermaeus Mora has been messing around with the Nordic powerhouses ever since he was known as the Woodland Man in Outmora. His two main problems is the last Dragonborn gets added to the although it's clear he attempted to replenish many arms beforehand. There's his Deja quest, discerning the transmundane. But, as he prides himself on knowledge, Hermaeus Mora no doubt knows about us as soon as the Greybeards scream his name. I mean, if all Skyrim knows, he has to know. Given how Morak was probably getting his escape plan together a fair bit before sending his cultists our way, it's also likely that Hermaeus Mora knew his imprisoned Dragonborn was making a great escape sooner rather than later. So, it seems that there is a right way. The problem is that Morak is extremely powerful, so Hermaeus Mora needs to fatten up his next pig for it to take down the Paul. I mean, if Mayor's Dagon can organise a cult to assassinate the Emperor of Cyrodiil, I'm sure the knowledgeable Calamari over here can get someone to send the Dragonborn some letters. And with him being a Daedric Prince of Knowledge, it makes sense that he knows that the last Dragonborn has this would explain why a letter includes certain places like Solcairn, and especially Apocrypha, since this is where Hermaeus Mora calls home. If challenging Marak is the goal, getting the Dragonborn stronger seems like the right thing to do, and doing it through something as mundane as letters is likely not going to raise any eyebrows, or at least have any fingers pointed at Hermaeus Mora. It's a way of manipulating the Dragonborn for the Daedric Prince's goal without us knowing, and he's giving us knowledge, which is his entire thing. Hermaeus Mora puts decent effort into his power,
Oi, 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 oi.
so it isn't as though this behaviour is out of hand. His weird skin book thing literally gives us more knowledge and us more knowledge. More than that, his speaking knockoff probably wants us to still get stronger post-Malak, since we're sort of on his payroll now. And he's not going to complain about having an even mightier servant. Hermaeus Mora probably doesn't want Alduin to end the world either, since that would just be a ton of lost knowledge. He has the knowledge, the means, and the motivation to send us these letters, and more than that, all of the strangeness regarding these letters makes sense if we attribute them to Hermaeus Mora. Ultimately, I feel that the Calamari King here is the most likely option as our secret admirer. However, I am trying to make sense of some pretty funky nonsense, like causing a stir in the Soul Cairn and Apocrypha, which you can probably just ignore if you're trying to play detective yourself. Truthfully, I don't believe that Bethesda really have a name or face attached to our friend. It could be someone we've never met in a different country that just so happens to have a strong intel network. It could also just be a gameplay feature more than anything else, and at least this one doesn't involve flying mammoths. The characters I've listed here aren't the only suspects too, so if you have any theories as to who the Dragonborn's friend might be, feel free to educate both other viewers and me in the comments section below. Much like Squid Game over here, I enjoy amassing Elder Scrolls knowledge. This channel is called Nox's Library after all. Either way, thank you for watching, and an extra thank you if you do the whole like, comment, subscribe ritual. I can't really believe we hit over 3,000 subscribers in 2025.
Nice.
And
Good
he
luck
is
with
hoping
that.
for an even better 2026 from both a YouTube perspective
Actually,
and
getting custom
the world.
service. Nice.
Hopefully you
Good
enjoyed
luck
this video,
with that.
and maybe I'll see
Endeavor.
you in another one down the line.
At least may nakuha akong ganito. Damn.
And so the pack was born again as the wolves of your basket to rule in life
Damn.
and
Damn.
seven
Damn.
days
Damn. Damn. Damn.
and so the pack was born again as the
All to
wolves
glory.
of your basket to rule in life and serve in death as the moonlight star hunter.
Ay, common lang yung good glory. Pero ano siya?
Your vision is flawed.
Pero stats is chaotic.
Merak, the first Dragonborn, the final rival of the last Dragonborn. In many ways, he's a dark reflection of us. Where we are the hero, he's the villain. Where our name is tied with glory, salvation, and the defeat of Alduin, Mirax is tied with deceit, enslavement, and destruction. He is certainly an interesting concept, even if the idea of a dark mirror has been used throughout media. But he somewhat suffers from a lack of screen time. On paper, he's interesting enough, especially because he's tied to one of the most intriguing Daedric princes, Hermaeus Mora. But I can't escape the feeling that Merak could have been so much more. The complexity is there, or at least the seeds of complexity are there. But before we discuss the narrative flaws of Merak's story, let us take the time to actually understand his story. Also, sorry if I
Waxing
sound very
forwards.
miserable, I'm a little ill right now, but I do have the will to live, so let's get to it. Now, we basically know nothing about Merak's early life, but it's not relevant anyway. The earliest thing we know is that he was a dragon priest of the dragon cult in Skyrim, being given a mask called Merak. Dragon priests have always shared their name with their masks, and Merak is no different. Now, I'm unsure if he was born Dragonborn or was given the title later, as was the case with Alessia, which is a name I want you to remember because it will come up. Either way, he was the first Dragonborn, even if history does not remember it that way, and the first mortal to be given a dragon soul from Akatosh, and I couldn't
Nice.
seem to
Mura lang
find a reason
siya.
why. As in, why is he Dragonborn? What is the purpose of him being given this gift? What was Akatosh's plan? Potentially, he could have been the one that was meant to stop Alduin, since the dragon cult had now spread from Atmora to Skyrim, and it seemed that the dragons treated their subjects a lot worse when they got to the Tamrielic mainland. The truth is, in a way, Merak was sort of undermining Alduin, although he never directly confronted the firstborn of Akatosh. You see, after he became a dragon priest, Merak seemed to want more knowledge and power, the greedy boy. Apparently, already having been taught the Thune by the dragons, and being functionally immortal wasn't enough for him. So he sought Hermaeus Mora for more knowledge, likely through one of the Black Books and some Lovecraftian tentacles. Much like us in the Dragon Ball
Hi.
DLC, Merak learned the Bend Will Shout, giving him the means to, bend wills, who'da thunk. As you probably know, this gave Merak the ability to control dragons and ride them, which began to form the basis for his rebellion. Given his power and his status as Dragonborn, Merak slew a great number of dragons in defiance of his winged overlords. Soon, it wasn't just him involved in his rebellion. He had also recruited the Dragon Priest trio of Alzadal, Dukan, resource, who you can find throughout Solstheim, proving to be a real thorn in the side of the dragon cult. Although this wasn't common knowledge yet, at least to the other cultists. Now, the timeline of Marak's stint in the dragon cult is quite obscure, but we do know that his rebellion was in action during the time of the Dragon Wars, when the people of Skyrim openly rebelled against the dragons. In fact, it is stated that Hakon One-Eye, one of the three heroes of Sovngarde that helped us defeat Alduin, sought Marak for his aid against Alduin. But Marak didn't think he needed their help to begin with, and refused to join in on the Dragon Wars, keeping his little rebellion separate.
They wanted to use me to deal with Alduin, Hakon and the rest. I chose otherwise.
It is also implied that Marak didn't care about defeating Alduin, with him saying that he could have done so when meeting us for the first time, provided that we had already beaten the World Eater before meeting Marak, but he chose a different path. Then again, he could have been waffling and didn't want to seem inferior to us. It's kind of like that one guy you meet at a sports club, claiming that he could have gone pro were it not for some arbitrary injury. Probably something to do with the knee.
Oh, you beat Alduin. Yeah, I could have done that too, 100% easily. Eyes closed. Why didn't I? Well, I didn't want to, but I could have if I did. I just did it.
Now, this probably could have been a bunch of baloney, considering that Marak lost to a dragon priest, but we'll get into that later. Let's get back onto the topic of timelines. Now, when trying to place Marak and his time in the dragon cult, we do get some sense of how long after Ysgramor's arrival, and the whole business with the snow elves, it all was. Arzadel, whom I mentioned before as one of Marak's dragon priest allies, is actually from Sarthal, and had gone travelling only to find his home destroyed when he got back. He was known for being one of the most knowledgeable and powerful mages of his era, and to my knowledge, the dragon cult hadn't yet come to Skyrim when Sarthal was destroyed by the snow elves, nor had he yet come when Ysgramor arrived with his 500 companions, since for all intent and purpose, Ysgramor was in charge after he had completed his purge against the snow elves. There are some theories that Ysgramor was a dragon priest, and had brought an army of dragons with him, which could have led to the bulk of the dragon cult following suit. I'm aware that I'm glossing over a lot of stuff with Ysgramor and the snow elves, but I have a video here about that if you're interested. Either way, if Arzadel was part of Marak's ranks, Ysgramor's arrival in Skyrim and the Dragon Wars probably took place within one lifetime, since both of which take place at the end of the Merithic era. It also gives us a sense of how old Marak is, being likely a younger generation than Ysgramor and the people of Sarthal, since he's a Proto-Nord, not an Atmoran, and a similar generation to the Sovngarde trio here. He could be part of an older generation, considering that dragon priests have immortality, but, plainly put, Marak is almost as old as the Nord ruled Skyrim, being somewhere between Ysgramor, who founded the country when Windhelm was built, and the Sovngarde trio. He could have been a great way to get some insight into the period, but it doesn't seem like he spent much time there, at least compared to how long he's been alive. This is because his rebellion eventually forced the dragon cult's hand. Valok the jailer, probably one of the strongest around, caught wind of Marak's dubious acts, and led a bunch of dragons to go fight the first Dragonborn. According to the book, The Guardian and the Traitor, as well as dialogue from the historian, Tharstan, the battle between Marak and Valok went full anime. You see, Solstheim wasn't originally an island, it was instead a region in Skyrim, attached to the Tamriel mainland, but the battle between the dragon priests was so explosive that Solstheim was separated from the mainland, which is a pretty crazy show of force, and a tangible, easy one to understand when getting an idea of how powerful these characters are in the lore. Valok and his forces managed to defeat Marak, the dragons burning his temple to the ground.
emergency
But before we can
alert.
land the
Ay,
final
red
blow on
rainfall warning
Marak,
na pala sa
King
amin.
Calamari swoops in and saves the first Dragonborn, and his allied dragon priests found themselves sealed away by Valok, who stayed and was buried on Solstheim so that he can be ready for Marak's return. Now, this doesn't really work out well for Valok, since he gets steamrolled by us. We must have caught him cold, because he doesn't really put on much of a fight, if I remember. But we'll cut him some slack at least. As Marak later finds out, the last Dragonborn is completely overpowered. The interesting thing to note about Valok and Marak is that, despite Alduin's later defeat and the fall of the dragon cult not too long after, the Skarl still hold Valok in high regard, referring to him as the god. Marak, however, is known as the traitor, which I guess implies that the Skarl could have had some kind of allegiance to the dragon cult. Then again, they could have just been calling Marak what he is, since he was a dragon priest and was a traitor to the dragon cult. It could also mean that they see Marak as a traitor to mankind, or mortals in general, since he turned to Hermaeus Mora for greater power and knowledge, who the Skarl see as the enemy, calling him the Demon of Knowledge, which is a wicked title. It's also interesting that the ancient Atmorans saw Hermaeus Mora similarly, and he's an almost Loki-like trickster in the myths around Ysgramor, sometimes called the Woodland Man back then. He's also weirdly associated with a hare, which you can see in this video about Ysgramor for more information about that. Essentially, Hermaeus Mora is the Tempter, the one who seeks to corrupt with knowledge. And while one of Ysgramor's shining traits was that he had often turned away from Yog-Sothoth Jr., Marak did not, and he fell into the Tempter's hands. Or tentacles. All those weird crab claw things he used to have in older Elder Scrolls games. I mean, look at them, he's so goofy looking. Hermaeus Mora's goofiness aside, he did save Marak and give him even greater knowledge in Apocrypha, but the first Dragonborn essentially became the Daedric Prince's prisoner and his prized trophy. Admittedly, I couldn't find why exactly Hermaeus Mora wanted Marak as a prisoner, but it makes sense for him to be an asset, an ultimate weapon of sorts, since he is really powerful. As a Dragonborn, there are also very few who consume knowledge in the way that Marak can regarding the food. He could have been Hermaeus Mora's eyes into that realm of knowledge, not that he needs any more eyes. Having said that, Marak also used this as an opportunity to amass knowledge of his own, in the hopes of escaping Apocrypha one day, for obvious reasons. We don't hear much about Marak throughout his time in Apocrypha. Hermaeus Mora has a track record of removing people from the annals of history, with an example coming from the Daedric Prince, Athelia, the Daedric Prince of Paths. It took the Vestige, the protagonist of ESO, to find out that Athelia even existed in the first place, so Lord Tentacles is pretty thorough when it comes to both erasing and collecting knowledge. Still, we hear a tiny peep from Marak in the Second Era, during the events of ESO. He tricked one of Hermaeus Mora's servants, Cipher of the Eye, to smuggle in some cursed scrolls into the scriptorium of Apocrypha, which caused the Daedra there to go mad. Here's a little excerpt from Cipher of the Eye, and we don't get much of a strong sense if this was part of Marak's plans, as he is described as the first servant, meaning he had a pretty high standing among Hermaeus Mora's forces. This is probably why he has a bunch of lurkers and seekers in his ranks. Given that he recruited members of the Dragon Cult the first time he had a rebellion, it shows that Marak has the charisma to get people on his side and to betray their original masters. Still, what we really need to take away is that Marak has been poking and probing in Apocrypha for some time, and his discontent must have been known to Hermaeus Mora before the events of the Dragonborn DLC. Then there are the events of the DLC themselves, which I can go over pretty quickly. I don't think a massive amount of elaboration is required. Marak finally has the arcane knowledge needed to exert himself into Nirn, and enslaves the people of Solstheim in their sleep, using them to rebuild his temple, harness the energy of the Stones of Power, and make a cult, gets sent to effectively assassinate us, which, I mean, is a bit hopeful, isn't it? You don't send a couple of masked scrubs to go deal with the Dragonborn. It's like sending a couple of rats to go fight a tiger. This becomes even more unfortunate for Marak, since sending his cultists to deal with us marks the beginning of the end for its plans. By getting our attention, our investigation eventually leads us to working with Hermaeus Mora to rid the world of the potential evil that Marak possessed. And we do so by learning his two most powerful shouts, Dragon Aspect and Bend Will. We confront him on the highest peak of Apocrypha, in what I consider to be probably the coolest boss arena in Skyrim. Have a tussle, and after he's weakened, Hermaeus Mora killsteals. We absorb his soul, and it kinda sounds like we end up being King Calamari's next Dragonborn servant. Hermaeus Mora's probably looking for a replacement for a while, and we also happen to spring into existence at the right time. So that's the basic long and short of Marak's story. There's definitely some complexity here. Marak is someone who just wants to get out of the door and find himself in prison. But his method is that he needs to be stopped. He desires power after all, Tamriel will be his mercy. He needed to be stopped. Don't feel too bad about that. But the secrets of the skull are lost to Hermaeus Mora to see this deed done. And, in many ways, the plot of the Dragonborn DLC is meant to be a tragedy filled with sacrifice. Storm sacrifices himself and the secrets of his people to Hermaeus Mora to stop Marak, leaving his daughter Freya an orphan, and with the burden of the title of Shaman. And then there's our sacrifice, giving ourselves to Hermaeus Mora in order to stop his rogue servant. Marak himself is a tragic figure, forced to be Hermaeus Mora's prisoner for thousands of years. And yet, it doesn't really feel all that tragic. Don't get me wrong, Solstheim itself is great, and Marak has the ingredients to be a very compelling antagonist, but he's just fine. He's got a cool voice and a great design, but I feel like we needed more. So let's talk about how Marak could have been improved, right after this halftime meeting break.
He's here. There he is. He's right here. He's right here. Look.
You have a lot of nerve to show your face
Well,
around
you
here.
got,
Son of a
you
bitch.
are a real beak breaker.
The main thing is that we probably should have interacted more with him. This is a similar problem that we see with Alduin, since we basically only talk to Marak 2 times. Or rather, he just talks at us. I mean, sure, he occasionally pops up to steal a dragon's soul, which is an awesome idea, by the way. That's a really cool mechanic from Bethesda, even if it can be a little annoying. But the 2 times I'm talking about are when we first meet him
Okay,
in
let's go with
Apocrypha,
it.
to which
Let's
he
go with
basically just says he's better than us and shoos us away, and then before we throw hands with him, where he spends the entire time saying that he'll win, and that Hermaeus Mora is a tentacled bellend. The thing is, we say nothing to him. The only words he hears from us are probably Fuss, Ro, and Dar. Not once can we ask him something, say something to maybe challenge what he thinks, or even get a word in to throw back in his face. All in all, he says 2 paragraphs to us, has a few battle lines, and that's it. Which is such a shame, considering that Marak is the centre of the Dragonborn DLC, similarly to how Serana is at the centre of Dawnguard. Now, you may or may not like Serana, but you do get to know her quite a lot throughout the Dawnguard story. You don't even get to say a word to her, despite the fact that he engages in conversation with us. I know it's not realistic to expect the same level of interaction as Serana with Marak, since he's the villain and the Dragonborn's main story is pretty short. But we needed something more. Now, how could we implement this in a realistic way by not really changing too much from the structure of the Dragonborn DLC? Well, it shouldn't be too hard. Marak is able to project himself into Tamriel to steal our dragon souls. So, when he does this, perhaps he stops for a little chat. he says.
Do you ever wonder if it hurts to have one's soul ripped out like that?
And you could interpret this as Marak showing a somewhat philosophical side, rather than just being his egotistical self. Perhaps this side gets shown off more, and maybe he talks about the nature of being a Dragonborn, and if this is what Akatosh had planned when making Marak the first Dragonborn. Perhaps he mentions Kine, who you may know as Kinnereth, and because he's that old, he would call her Kine, and ponder aloud if she ever imagined that mortals could achieve the power the two Dragonborns have when she gifted mortals the power of the Thune. Maybe he even asks us what we think, since we are the only other person like him and the only other being that can relate to him. Marak is evidently a curious person. He wouldn't have fallen into Hermesmore's grasp in the first place. So let him express that. Let him show off more than just his ego and his arrogance. Now, Marak is keeping tabs on us pretty much as soon as he's made aware that we came to Solstheim to investigate his cult. He knows we can access Apocrypha through the Black Books, and has essentially started a kind of rebellion with some of Hermesmore's forces. So, you could probably easily justify that he knows when we go in and out of Apocrypha. Maybe he could be projected as a voice as we enter the Black Books and get knowledge from Hermesmore. He could mention why he saw power and if he
That's a disappointing
sure,
damage.
the monologue in the background could be quite annoying, but the sentence in Marak's thoughts and time later in the chapter could give us more insight about him. We don't know enough about Marak's intentions and why he went to Hermesmore in the first place. Was it just because he's a book talk addict who wanted more to read? Or was it because he thought he could dethrone Alduin and take over the world? As stated before, it doesn't seem like defeating Alduin was ever part of Marak's plans. But why? What were his plans? There's a lot we're left to assume with Marak, to the point where I just feel like we're filling in some pretty large blanks. That's sort of fine with Alduin, because he can be seen more as a force of nature, but Alduin still kinda sucks as a villain. Marak represents what we could be if we make the wrong choices with Hermesmore, but it's impossible to understand who that is because we don't know enough about him. He feels like just another domino to knock down, but there's a big chance that Marak is meant to be so much more. A theme of the Elder Scrolls protagonists is that they vanish from the face of the earth when their games are done. There were rumours in Oblivion that the Nerevarin had left for Akavir, and a very popular theory, which might as well be true, dictates that the hero of Kvatch became Sheogorath. Our defeat of Marak might lead us to directly take his place and stop Apocrypha, meaning that we would have to make an immense sacrifice to stop his threat, all as part of Hermesmore's plan. This could explain away the last Dragonborn from Elder Scrolls 6, if we ever get it. Come on, Todd, I don't care about the number of trees, I just want a release date, or at least a damn name for the game. Anyway, all the last Dragonborn could be sent on an expedition to that water, and the way this conflict with Marak does not give the last Dragonborn a happy ending. Unlike the main quest and Dawnguard, we are tied to a Daedric prince, now and forevermore. It's a great sacrifice, and it feels like the person we make this sacrifice to stop should have been fleshed out more. Bethesda can write good villains. They did it in previous Elder Scrolls games with Dagoth in Morrowind and Mankar Cameron in Oblivion. For me, Skyrim lacks that great main villain, and of Harkon, Alduin and Marak, it feels like the Black had the best chance. Having said that, some things are really confusing to make Marak's existence work. The main thing is a retcon around who was the first Dragonborn. I mentioned her before, but prior to Marak's existence, Saint Alessio, the founder of the first Cyrodiilic Empire, was also the first Dragonborn, and the reason why Dragonborns exist in the first place. You see, Alessia was made Dragonborn on her deathbed, with her soul being placed in the Amulet of Kings, and those of her bloodline could later wield the amulet as Dragonborn emperors. did Akatosh make Mirak Dragonborn? It's strange because Mirak was a servant of Alduin, who Akatosh wants us to defeat. So if Mirak was meant to do the same, why choose a guy that works for him? Why choose Mirak, a dragon priest, to be the guy built to slay dragons? I personally can't make much sense of it, and maybe you guys can. And that brings up another question I want to ask you too. Is Mirak's inclusion worth the Alessia retcon? Realistically, I don't think it changes too much. As far as history is concerned, at least in game history, Alessia is still the first documented Dragonborn. People don't know about Mirak, but Bethesda had an idea for a Dragonborn versus Dragonborn story before Mirak was included. Uriel Septim V was meant to be that Dragonborn we face, and in early drafts of Skyrim, he was meant to return from Akavir after an apparent invasion went awry. He would come back as a sort of dragon king with an army of dragons at his back, and commence what would essentially be another Akavirian invasion. Instead, Uriel Septim V was merely a warrior emperor who met his end upon his invasion of Akavir. But perhaps this idea could have been used instead of Mirak, although I think reintroducing the Septim dynasty again might have caused some problems, and is probably why Bethesda didn't use this storyline to begin with. So maybe things are better the way they are. Now, I do want to conclude by saying that I don't think Mirak is a bad character. The idea and the design are neat, but the execution is fine. Just fine. He's got some pretty incredible stage presence, but suffers from the Dragonborn DLC main quest being too short, especially compared to Bloodborne, and it feels like Bethesda could have done a bit more, but Dragonborn, in general, is massive. Solstheim gives us a lot to do, so it makes sense that the quest is relatively short, but there should have been more room for Mirak to fill.
And so the first Dragonborn meets the last Dragonborn at the summit of Apocrypha.
As it stands, the idea of Mirak is better than the character we got. Well, that's what I think anyway. Do you guys agree? Do you like Mirak? Or do you more so like the idea of him? Perhaps you even think the idea of him is dumb to begin with. Let me know. Either way, thank you for watching. You know the simple ritual, the like, the comment, the subscribe. You are compelled by the magic of ad revenue, I guess. I don't know, I'll just put that in. And I'll see you next time.
Take
Wow, no.
Of all the followers in Skyrim, Serana stands out from the rest. There is more to her story, more complexity to her compared to the other followers, and this makes sense, since she was added as part of a DLC, and she's the centre of that DLC, being the heart of the story. As well, she came with extra mechanical depth, commenting on certain locations that were in the quest, and her extra NPC behaviour meant that she could do things like use the Skyforge during Codlike's funeral. Come on, Serana, have some decorum. Now, I'm aware that not everyone is a fan of Serana, and the God Vampire but a sizable part of the audience still wants to marry her to this day. Unfortunately, she rejects us, although this is for good reason. While it's not massively info, Serana is one of the most attractive characters in Skyrim, and probably has that Serana is a vampire of the Volkihar clan, and daughter to its patron, Hargon. They are an ancient family, with the blood of pure vampires, that makes them more than just the common leeches we see prowling around Tamriel at night. No one in the family was born a vampire, but Serana mentions that before they were born, they used to work for the prince, Oleg Gol. These are all known quantities, but what isn't known is how old Serana and her family actually are. She is, at the bare minimum, older than the Septim Empire, since she expresses surprise that there's an empire in Syria, but knows that Skyrim is about to. Thus, she's younger than the first High King of Skyrim, King Harald and the 13th of Ysgramor's line, and older than the Third Cyrodiilic Empire, which all sounds well and good until you realise that this is roughly a 4,000 year gap. So it doesn't really narrow anything down for us, and because it's Bethesda, there's evidence that Serana could have been born between the Third and Second Cyrodiilic Empires, the Second and First, or before the First. All we really know is that she was born before one of these empires and lived between the two of them. It's quite annoyingly clear that Bethesda themselves haven't really decided on a time period, or at least haven't told us, and Serana's relatively isolated upbringing in her castle doesn't give us too many clues. But my bet is that she was born before the Alessian Empire in the early years of the First Era. My main evidence for this is that she surprised Cyrodiil was the seat of an empire in general, rather than saying she surprised
It's a
there's another.
spider.
There's also some evidence that she's older than the Second Cyrodiilic Empire at the very least, which comes from her mother, who has been trapped in the Soul Cairn, presumably very soon after she hid Serana in that too, and she is guarded by Dunavir. Now, Dunavir used to fly around Tamriel as one of the baddest dragons around, and
Uy,
since he's in
baka gusto
Tamriel,
nila
we can assume that he did so in the late Homerific era. He also knows what a Dragonborn is, meaning that he wasn't trapped in the Soul Cairn before at the very least Merak was around, and was likely trapped in the Soul Cairn before the Second Cyrodiilic Empire, since that was when the Dragon God were around slaying dragons, and where we got the whole the Dragonborn is a dragon killer with his efforts being from, most likely coming from Northern Syria. He founded the Empire. Sure, he could have survived, but according to Dunavir, he was a big deal when he was in Tamriel, and there's no mention of him in the Atlas of Dragons, a documentation written during the time of the Second Cyrodiilic Empire by members of the Dragon God, which mentions a bunch of known living dragons and those that have been hunted. It includes Odovin, Parthenax, that one guy we monster mash at the Western Watchtower, but the creators of the Serana dialogue add-on mod seems to agree with my theory that Serana is older than any empire based in Cyrodiil, since she mentions in an interaction with another fellow warlord, Remiel, that she was around when the Dwemer were, and the Dwemer vanished around 700 years into the First Era, which was during the Alessian Empire. If you wanted to do some far-reaching, there's also the Vanilla line.
I always wondered what the dwarves actually looked like. I hear they're like elves. Beards.
Now, if you're a really good lawyer, you could potentially use this as evidence that Bethesda is implying that Serana was around when the Dwemer were, because she's heard they're elves with beards, presumably by someone who's actually seen them. But you could also argue that this isn't the case, source of domination and enslavement of mortals. His other delightful titles include the King of Strife, the Schemer Prince, the Lord of Lies, the Harvester of Souls, and oh man, I'm just gonna rip it off like a plaster. The King of the Arbor, which rhymes with this fruit. I'm sure you can work out the rest. I mean, I don't know about you guys, he sounds like a pleasant fellow, the kind of guy you'd really want to worship, and I actually can't be sarcastic. What is wrong with these two? They're psychotic. Who worships this idiot? Serrano she does say that they were a functioning family. Obviously a strange family, but a powerful one at the very least, since Harkon claims that he was once a mighty king, but feared death, and thus turned to Molag Bal for immortality, which says to me that he was always a monumental fucking bastard, even before becoming a vampire lord. This is interesting to me because Serrano expresses that her family at least functioned as one before they all became vampires, and while she was never close to her father, she still sees him as one. I'm more inclined to believe that this is both monumental and very sad cope from Serrano's end, and that Harkon never cared for his wife or daughter, because he was willing to put them to get what he wanted, and he doesn't seem to show any remorse for it whatsoever. Harkon even seems proud, and in my opinion, he was always a horrible father. His vampiric powers just made it all more obvious. Now, this is the part of the video where I need to do the responsible thing and tell you that this is the section which covers some very dark themes, including SA. And if you don't know what that acronym stands for, you maybe shouldn't be here. If you want to skip this section, know that the ritual Serrano suffered to become a pure-blooded vampire is extremely traumatic, and that trauma continues to follow. But you can just skip to this timestamp, otherwise you have been warned. Now the first of Harkon's many crimes that we are made aware of is when he sacrificed 1,000 innocents in Molag Bal's name. In return, Molag Bal presented them with his gift, the gift of his blood. And with his blood came immortality, but even all the lives lost in exchange for this gift were not enough. Molag Bal was summoned, a ritual commenced, one in which the women are offered to the Daedric Prince. For the gift of vampirism, pure-blooded vampirism, Harkon offered his wife, Valerica, and daughter, Serrano. Whenever Molag Bal takes these women, most do not survive, and those that do become his, for he is the father of Cope, and his victims are his daughters. Although mother and daughter survived, the Volkihar family would forever be changed, marred by this event. Harkon and Valerica would be at odds, husband and wife, in name only, and Serrano, the lonely daughter, a pawn to both. Before we get into that, it's worth
I hate that
understanding
little
how horrific this
I
ritual
hate
actually
that
is,
roach.
and to do that, we need to talk about how it originated. Long before even the Volkihar clan emerged in prominence, there was a Nedic woman named Lemay. She was a priestess of Arkay, loyal to her god, but unfortunate enough to catch the eyes of a certain Daedric prince. Molag Bal had always been an avid user of necromancy, and in this period of the Merithic era, he sought to spite Arkay, the lord of the cycle of life and death. He fell upon Lemay and forced himself upon her, brutally, where her body was left mangled in the wilderness of Skyrim. Before he returned to
AI
Valhalla,
viewers, let's
Molag
go.
Bal shed a single drop of blood on Lemay's face, and now, in a comatose state, the priestess was found by a coven of Nedic tribesmen, who took her in and tried to tend to her wounds. They soon found that she healed unnaturally, that there was something wrong with the body, and attempted to claim her could feel the air in her
What is
lungs,
that?
the warmth of her
What
blood,
are
or the chill of the
those?
winter wind.
Alright,
Now
level
he was
25 na
dead.
pala ako.
In a rage,
Sure.
she massacred the nomads and fed upon them, doing to the men what Molag Bal had done unto her. She ripped the throats of the women and feasted on the eyes of the children, and in her bloody rage she had become the unwilling bride of Molag Bal, and the first daughter of Cold Harbour. She would be known as Lamay Bar, and she was now a monster, cursed to shun the sun and live forever in the shadows. But while she was the first victim, she would not be the last, and vampirism spread. Lamay Bar dedicated her eternal undeath to the hatred of Molag Bal, the one who cursed her, and RK, the one who abandoned her.
Molag Bal said you would not come. He said you turned your light away from me. Okay, do you hear me? You are false! I reject you!
She was Molag Bal's first victim, and the first tragedy at the hands of vampirism.
Ay,
A
ay,
tragedy
ay.
repeated over and over for those who seek power. It's important to understand the violence and visceral brutality of what happened to Lemay, for this act is what Molag Bal's ritual sought to replicate. His surviving victims, like Sarana, are left in a near-death state, and survival is unlikely. Sarana herself calls the event degrading, but there's proof that this event is something she struggles to move on from, and degrading is far too light an adjective. She is marred by this, traumatized. Let's put a pin in this for now and return to a lighter topic, like traumatic family dynamics. God, who did Bethesda hire to write this? Kentaro Miura? I mean, I wouldn't have actually complained about that. He's the best ever. Rest in peace. Now, I joke about the family trauma, but it's worth talking about it. It's clear that Harkon was always the worst, and that Sarana's stronger familiar relationship came from Valerica, her mother. The problem is, even in a much healthier environment, the kind of trauma the pair suffered in the ritual is not the easiest thing to come back from. And then there's the prophecy of the sun, which was essentially the final nail in the coffin for the Volkihar family. We have already established that Harkon is power hungry to a stupid degree, and basically goes mad upon discovering that he can turn off the sun with Auriel's bow. I mean, it's a stupid plan to begin with. If you turn off the sun forevermore, the plants die. If the plants die, all the animals and the people die. If the animals and the people die, you have no blood, and thus the vampires die. Not a great plan, but Harkon goes all in on this plan anyway, and to do so, he requires the blood of a daughter of Cold Harbour, and he has two, his daughter and his wife. As before, he has no qualms using both for his goal, but Valerica would not be a victim again, and decides to do everything in her power to oppose Harkon. While this is the morally correct thing to do, this puts Sarana in an awkward spot. Say what you want about Harkon, but as Sarana herself points out, he is her father. She grew up under his care, and doesn't really seem to do anything out of hatred for her father. In fact, it feels like she does most of the stuff in Dawnguard as a moral obligation to stop him. And yes, she got on with her mother like they were the best of friends, but after becoming a vampire and discovering Auriel's prophecy, that relationship had ended as well. Valerica no longer viewed Sarana as a friend or a daughter, merely a pawn to use against the wicked Harkon Volkihar. The one silver lining in all this is that Valerica does love Sarana, and is blinded by this love in many ways. She does everything to save Sarana. By doing so, she treats her daughter as a soldier, and by acting in this way, and later sealing her away, Sarana loses both her old life and the only friend she ever had. She becomes nothing more than a tool in Harkon's hands to both her parents, and while Harkon sees her as the key to seeing his goals realised, Valerica sees sees her as a liability, and ultimately she awakes in a new world with nothing left, and knows that Harkon must be stopped. But unlike Valerica, she has yet to close her heart to all of it, and it aches. The child she was wants that family to reconcile, and things to return to the way they were. But the vampire princess she is now knows that isn't possible. Her family is broken forevermore, and perhaps this is why we are so important to her. We, the last
Expertise.
Dragonborn, find her in Dim Hollow Crypt, and whether intentionally or not, offer her the kindness she has been longing ever since she was made a vampire. We become her first connection in this new life, and guide her through the hardest trials a child should ever have to endure. She speaks of being lonely a lot.
Well, growing up the way I did, you get used to it. A little bit. That's one of the reasons I wanted to come with you. But what about you?
And yet with us, she no longer is. Perhaps that's why, whether we like it or not, the last Dragonborn is more tender with Serana compared to other followers. We don't say to her, follow me, I need your help, as if it's a command. We instead say, come with me, as a friend would. Still, it's pretty infamously documented that many in the community would rather be more than just friends with Serana. There is, of course, this interaction, where the last Dragonborn shoots a shot, only to be shot down.
Is that why you're wearing a heavy weapon armor? Look, you're great, really. But I just don't think that's for us. Especially not me. Though, my history, I still kind of get chill walking by the temple. Imagine going in.
The main reason she offers in this rejection is that she can't go into the temple because of the trauma she suffered from being made a vampire. This is fair enough, but I also think this has to do with her parents as well. Now, I'm no psychologist, so this isn't a professional opinion, but after watching what happened to her parents, where they practically planned each other's demise, there is probably something in her subconscious that makes her no longer believe in marriage. Children with divorced parents are known to have difficulties forming trusting relationships, especially romantically. And while Serana's parents didn't divorce, what Valerica and Harkon ended up doing to each other was way worse. As I have already mentioned, Serana kind of doesn't have a life outside her adventures with us, other than just hanging around with the Dawn Guard. And we are her only friend, at least in vanilla Skyrim. In her mind, perhaps she thinks that she's more likely to lose us if she were to marry us or become romantically involved. Ultimately, it's trauma that's stopping her, and I'm confident that this trauma is implied throughout the game, if lightly. Anything to do with Serana's ritual is tread on lightly by Bethesda, and Serana doesn't really talk about it much, but it's clear that it still affects her. She has complicated and somewhat contradictory thoughts about it in an oddly human way. At least, more human than you would expect from Bethesda's writing. She doesn't regret becoming a vampire and getting all this power, at least overtly, and more so regrets the event itself and what it did to her family. If you go to the abandoned house in Markarth, where you can do Murloc Bowl's daily quest, Serana can cower before the altar, which may or may not be intentional by Bethesda, since she also cowers in the Dawnstar Sanctuary, which is linked to Sithis, not Molag Bal. The part I find more interesting is how Serana reacts if you ask her if she ever thought about being cured of her vampirism. You have to say the right things, and the lines that finally convince her to take the cure is, look at what it's done to your family, and you can finally be your own person again. Now, this can be interpreted in many ways, and more intelligent people than I could decipher this better, but in my mind, Serana subconsciously believes that the trauma she suffered at the hands of Molag Bal, the event that tore her family apart, had to be for something. That something is the gift or curse of vampirism. to be Molag Bol's daughter of Cold Harbour, now and forevermore. But remaining as a vampire is to remain in that trauma, that hatred, to always belong to Molag Bol, to always be marred by the very thing that tore her family apart. LeMay Bal remained a vampire, and her own death was twisted by hate and vengeance, her very soul ruined by that godforsaken day. Serana has a chance to do what LeMay could not, and move on from her trauma and not let it define her life any longer. When we say that she can finally be her own person again, we mean that she can live a life by being alive, that Molag Bol no longer has control over her. Ultimately, it has to be her choice, and for the first time, that's what we give her. Now, I know there are quite a lot of people that don't like Serana, finding her annoying perhaps, or are frustrated that she, like the last Dragonborn, is at the centre of Dawnguard. That is fair, but Bethesda weirdly gave Serana quite a bit of complexity. Sure, we love characters like Jazago, but Jazago is basically an arrogant catman with unlimited self-confidence and equally unlimited potential to level up. He's also strangely charismatic, but that's kind of it for him. On the other hand, Serana, from a writing perspective, obviously gets a lot more. Whether you like her or not, I still feel like she's worth being the subject of a case study, because Serana should be the bare minimum of what we get out of new Bethesda followers, and yet I still feel like this is a bar that is yet to be cleared, despite how mechanically primitive she is, after the likes of Fallout 4 and Starfield. To be fair, I don't think it's on the cards for Bethesda to make a character as dark as Serana again, at least in terms of backstory. It was a brave choice that sort of went under the radar, although this is mainly because Bethesda tread very lightly around the darker topics of Serana's backstory. I also think that Serana is lightning in a bottle for Bethesda in some ways. By her nature as the centre of the Dawnguard DLC, she was always going to irk some people. I mean, Skyrim's meant to be about us. It almost feels like a power fantasy, where we get to play around in this Skyrim theme park. And I'm not really confident that Bethesda can do what they did with Serana specifically with another NPC again. But at the same time, Serana really does stand out to me, for the darkness and complexity of her character, and how she, not the last Dragonborn, is the centre of the story for once. As the last Dragonborn, we are the knight in shining armour, and we have already slain our dragons, but sometimes the story needs to be about the princess trapped in the tower, about how she escaped the tower, not because she was a damsel for the knight to save, but because she followed their path, stood by their side, and faced her demons alongside them.
Happy or sad?
Sad.
Okay. I warn you. Break your heart.
Already broken.
Bells on the docks, they cry out for the mortal dead. And when
much so that it kind of feels like he's the main man as far as their pantheon is concerned, despite there being evidence that Nords didn't really care much for him in Oblivion. Of course, it's been over 100 years, and those 100 years have seen a lot of change in the continent of Tamriel, but it is odd that Skyrim, of all places, is the country in a civil war over Talos instead of the place that he ruled from, Cyrodiil. So let's have a look at Talos' divinity, his worship in Tamriel, and why it's so odd that Nords worship him so heavily in the way that they do in Skyrim. That's not to say that they couldn't be passionate about Talos worship in general, but the way that it's talked about in Skyrim, the game and the region, doesn't feel right compared to what we're told in earlier games. Now, while this is a video about Talos, we're going to have to start a long time before he was even born, and I'm going to have to ask you to trust me here and let me cook. So, you may have heard that Talos is the 9th divine, joining the Cyrodiilic religion of the 8 divines, but that doesn't mean there are only 8 or 9 gods. There are, or have been, many more, and the 8 divines act as the imperial pantheon, a sort of standardised pantheon that's spread across Tamriel, but most countries still worship their own sets of gods. For instance, Hyrule worship their 12 divines, and the Khajiit only worship cat versions of the gods. Seriously, every single one of them is a cat. It is brilliant. This is Cat Sheagora. He is adorable. But the thing is, the 8 divines are a sort of hodgepodge collection of 2 older pantheons, created by the founder of the first Cyrodiilic Empire, Saint Alessia. You see, when she overthrew her Aelid oppressors, ancient elves that enslaved the needs of what would later become Cyrodiil, she did it with the help of several allies, which included Aelid turncoats who joined her, the Nords of Skyrim, and some divine warriors in the shape of Morahaus, son of Kain, and Pelinal, who might be an avatar of Shor/Shazar/Lorcan. Her rebellion only came about because she prayed to the Nordic goddess Kain, who sent Morahaus and offered visions. Alessia also made a deal with Akatosh to protect Tamriel from the forces of Oblivion, considering that her Aelid enemies had Daedric forces in their ranks, specifically from Meridia, in the shape of her Aurorans. So, with Aelids, Needs, who worshipped some Aldmeri gods, Nords and some helpful Asia all backing her up, Alessia had a lot of people to appease. When she founded her empire, she ended up creating the 8 divines as a kind of compromise. This pantheon folded in the Nordic gods with the Aelid ones, changing them about a bit to fit into a new empire without any infighting. For instance, Auriel, who was traditionally a sun god, became Akatosh. Junor the Owl, who was the Nordic god of runes, became Julianos. Kain essentially became Kinnereth, and so on and so forth. The 8 divines are made up of Akatosh, the dragon god of time, Arke, the god of birth and death, Dibella, the horny one, Julianos, the magic man, Kinnereth, the best one, Mara, the one crazy about motherhood and marriage, Stendar, the god of hate and Daedra apparently, and Zenithar, the god who's all about the Benjamins. These gods are all Aedra, and the religion survived for a very long time. But what I find interesting is that it took until Tiber Septim to turn the 8 into the 9. You see, as cool as Imperial propaganda makes Tiber Septim sound, he is not the first mortal to be made a god. There is actually a method for becoming a god in the Elder Scrolls, which involves a process called apotheosis. This can be done in numerous ways, like Morrowind's Tribunal using some special Dwemer tools on the heart of Lorcan to ascend, or getting special recognition from another god, like Mara apparently raising Arcade to godhood. Mortals becoming gods is reasonably common, and it shouldn't really be a question of whether Talos is a real god, which we'll get into a little later. Even Alessia apparently reached apotheosis in death, and she was later joined by Remen Cyrodiil, another Dragonborn who also founded another empire after the Alessian one fell, and he picked up the pieces to show some snake people who the real boss is. Well, that's assuming the Seiski were actually snake people. You can't trust most of Elder Scrolls lore. Now, Remen was also known as the worldly god, while Alessia was made a saint and still has a statue in the Imperial City to this day. Yet neither joined the 8 Divines, despite both having a good claim to be one of them, at least in my opinion. Only Tiber Septim did, and he became the 9th. All this is to say that Tiber Septim was a big deal, considered bigger than his 2 divine predecessors. But why? Well, he did rule over all of Tamriel, whether through conquest or by treaty, something never done before. Tiber Septim also showed off that he had the abilities of a divine being in his lifetime before he had officially ascended, having access to the Numidium and thus the Heart of Lorcan, while also using Kim, a form of sort of divine ascendance, to rewrite reality and change Cyrodiil from a jungle to what we see in Oblivion. Yes, this is a bit of a weird retcon, but if you combine this with Tiber Septim's Dragonborn powers, it's clear that he was packing immense heat in his life. Granted, he lost his voice powers when he got his throat slit, but that's not relevant right now. When he did finally bite the bullet at the ripe old age of 108, he was raised to divinity in Aetherius, apparently as Akatosh's right hand, or I guess right claw or wing. Yeah, that'll do. Now, while the Thalmor might not see him as a god, due to his once being a human, you get a buff when praying to his shrines, just like every other divine shrine in the game, and you need his blessings in the Night of the Nine Oblivion DLC to finally do in this unfeathered, Oscar-looking dweeb. So, if Tiber Septim is such a cool dude, and a special god, why do we have evidence that the Nords didn't much care for him during the time of the Oblivion Crisis, at least in the same way that the Empire did? The evidence in question comes from an Oblivion NPC working in the Great Chapel of Talos in Bruma. This is Isa Raymond, the chapel's priestess, and she says, "We're trying to bring the comfort of the chapel to the Nords here, but Bruma's Nords stick to their heathen gods and uncivilized practices." Now, you could argue that Bruma's Nords are separate from Skyrim's Nords, and that there are some cultural differences. This is a fair assessment. For instance, people in Hong Kong are culturally different to the people in China because of the influence of Britain, and even speak a different language. Well, technically dialect, but Cantonese and Mandarin are so different that they might as well be their own languages. But then another question arises. Why would the people of Bruma stick more closely to the traditional practices of the Nords than the people of Skyrim? Britain's occupation of Hong Kong made them more, well, British, at least culturally speaking, so you'd think that the people of Bruma would be a bit more imperial than the Skyrim Nords, especially because Skyrim is quite literally closer to the Atmoran roots, and there's more in the country to help them stick to their own religion, like the Tombs, organisations like the Companions, places like Kynesgrove and so on. So, chances are, 100 odd years before Skyrim, the game, the country wasn't as hot on Talos, at least to the same degree we see in the game today, where he's basically the main man. So who were they hot on? Well, we mentioned them before with Shor, Kai and Junor and a bunch of others. These names came from the earliest Nordic pantheon, which had animal aspects, and their gods reflected these animals, which we see represented in the many Nordic tombs filled with Draugr and the occasional dragon priest. For example, there's the fox, which represents Shor, the hawk for Kine, the bear for Sun, the wolf for Mara, the moth for Debella, because apparently moths are horny, the owl for Junor, the whale for Stun, the snake for Orkay, and the dragon for Alduin. This evolves into the more modern Nordic pantheon we see later on, which kept similar gods but largely dropped the whole animal thing. And this is what I assume Isa Raman referred to when she talked about the Nords' heathen gods. Now, theoretically, the gods should still care a lot for these gods, especially Shor and Kine, who have always been there for them, despite Shaw being dead. Throughout history, this power couple have always had humanity's back, specifically the Atmorans and later Nords. Shaw, in his fox form, saved Ysgramor from falling for one of Hermaeus Mora's tricks in a myth. While Kyne did so much to make the people of Skyrim strong, she created them on the throat of the world, according to certain stories, gave them the power of the voice, and tasked Paarthurnax with helping humanity learn the voice, at least according to etchings on the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar. This is why the Greybeards dedicated themselves to Kinnereth, which is Kyne's imperial name, and why Kyne's Grove is named after her. Everyone in Skyrim wants to go to Sovngarde too, Shaw's realm in Aetherius, where Sun, who is also dead, waits to test them at the end of the Whalebone Bridge. Yet we don't hear people scream that they fight in Shaw or Kyne's name. Instead, the people of Skyrim are screaming about Talos or Eastmere, which is a title Talos and later us get, but they still want to go to Sovngarde. Now typically, if you follow a god, you usually end up in their realm. So if you die a werewolf, you're automatically a follower of Hircine and you end up in his hunting ground. And while Shaw seems to be welcoming of anybody who has an honourable death, I couldn't tell you a single NPC that mentioned Shaw off the top of my head, but you can name many who want to go to Sovngarde. So something here doesn't quite add up.
Because I like it. Well, hang on, you've just... No, I like it. This is brilliant. But I like this.
From what I can tell, something big happened between Oblivion and Skyrim to make the Nords shift from thousands of years of religion, because it isn't just Talos worship that represents this shift. Practically every god is referred to by their Nordic names, essentially the ones that are used in the 8 Divines, not their Nordic names. In Whiterun we have the Temple of Kinnereth, not Kyne, and the shrines around the country are all named after the imperial iterations of the gods. This goes so far that even the Greybeards, who are part of an ancient Nordic order that stretches back to Jurgen Windcaller in the First Era, are affected. Arngir calls Kinnereth Kyne, and that just doesn't make any sense, since it's stated frequently that the Greybeards do not come down from High Hrothgar, and don't really care about what the Empire is doing. So they really should be calling Kinnereth Kyne. They are a stickler for tradition, and Kinnereth's traditional name is Kyne. Now, I think this might be due to out-of-universe reasons. What I think happened is that Bethesda saw the popularity of Oblivion as an entry point into the series, and decided to essentially standardise the names of the gods to not confuse those coming from Oblivion. Outside of the world of Elder Scrolls, this makes sense, but in the world, this implies that, between the Elder Scrolls 4 and 5, there has been an imperialization of Skyrim's religion. This doesn't matter much for the likes of Mara and Dibella, who kept the same name between pantheons and assumably have similar identities, but it matters for basically everyone else. And this could have been a great talking point as part of the Civil War. If you want to look at things super simply, Ulfric's rebellion started because of Talos worship, with the idea being that the Nords should be able to worship whomever they wanted. There are also a bunch of other factors, like the Empire being in a weaker position and showing some decline, along with the usual amount of Elder Scrolls racism. Oh, actually no, I take that back. A light dusting of Elder Scrolls racism. Do you want to see the usual amount of Elder Scrolls racism? Just have a look at the history of the Dunmer. Yikes. They called them farm tools and everything. Anyway, another element that could have been involved with the Stormcloak Rebellion is the idea that being a part of the Empire has been slowly draining Skyrim of its unique culture. Ulfric could have been screaming about bringing back Shul as the main dude to worship, calling Kinnereth Kyne, and how Nords should also give the likes of Sun some love again. This would have further helped the argument about the Nords reclaiming their country's culture and making it more reasonable, especially because we meet Sun in Sovngarde. We know these Nordic gods are real. Bringing back shore worship could be why everyone keeps going on about Sovngarde, and shore could have been pushed alongside Talos as a part of an attempted cultural revival. This would make even more sense considering that the Empire don't really worship Shore all that much, who they call Shazar, and omit from the pantheon as a sort of forgotten god in favour of Akatosh being its head. Instead, it feels like Talos replaced Shore in Skyrim, yet all these Nords still keep going on about going to Shore's realm of Sovngarde. I mean, Shore is dead, so maybe it is a bit odd to worship a dead god, but the whole situation would be like wanting to go to Valhalla, praising, I don't know, Freya the whole time, but you just ignore Odin, who your ancestors used to worship as their head honcho god. The entire dynamic of Talos being the main man and Shore just not being around
Wow,
just doesn't
ice
make any
cream.
sense.
Pwede
There's
naman.
even a book
Habang
in
malamig.
Morrowind called The
Sulitin ang lamig.
Varieties of Faith in the Empire, and this book states that Shore is still being worshipped as one of the main gods in that country. Bear in mind that Morrowind only takes place about 6 years before Oblivion does. Now that's not to say that Talos worship wouldn't be big in Skyrim, or that it couldn't have risen after the Oblivion crisis. After all, Martin Septim, a descendant of Talos, saved the world from Mehrunes Dagon, and this act could have been what got a lot of Nords to start turbo-worshipping Talos. It does help that the official story of Tiber Septim states that he is Talos from Atmora. Now this makes no sense, because no one has come from Atmora since the First Era, and the place is practically a dead continent, but whatever. Talos was also raised in Skyrim, won his first battles there and trained under the Greybeards, earning the title of Ysmir. Nord heroes are associated with the title, including Talos of course, King Wolfhalf, and then us, the last Dragonborn, and it can be assumed that when people say by Ysmir, they mean by Talos. Although, as the last Dragonborn, feel free to take the praise if you'd like. It even feels like some revisionism is being done to make Talos fit in with the ideal of a true Nordic hero. You see, while the official story says that Talos is from Amora, making him an Atmoran, and other sources claim that he was a man called Hjalti from Alcair and High Rock, likely making him a Breton, Heimskir here is convinced he is a Nord.
In mortal life, Talos was a Nord, possessed of unmatched tactical skill, limitless wisdom, and the power to see into men's hearts.
This has gone so far that Talos is kind of what everyone is talking about. He is the main man now, which is interesting and strange considering that when he was raised to godhood, it was apparently as the right hand of Akatosh. Yet Nords never really seem to care about Akatosh, since he doesn't appear in their older pantheons. Well, technically he does through Alduin and the dragons, but draconic worship clearly isn't that strong a thing in Skyrim beyond the Merithic era. I also want to say it is a bit odd that Talos worship has such a strong association with being a true Nord in Skyrim, because that shouldn't really be the case. Sure, he could be the ideal that Nords strive toward, but it's a new phenomenon, and one introduced by Imperials. Worship of Shor, Kain, and the Nordic iterations of the gods should be where the whole true Nord thing comes from, so it all just feels a little illogical. Now, I'm not saying that religion and such passionate feelings around religion have to be logical. Matters spurred on by passion still matter, but there are ways to make this feel more natural, given what we know about the culture of Skyrim before, well, Skyrim the game. You see, the Talos argument boils down to, we Nords worship Talos, and we should worship who we want. But he is fundamentally an imperial god. The argument probably should have been more complex. You could see it as the Outmer wanting to rewrite history made by man. As we've established, Talos came under the category of Nordic hero when he earned the title of Ysmir. So, with the Thalmor wanting to bin him, you can understand why the Nords are so miffed. But being more miffed than the Imperials
Mega Jump
Cyrodiil
while
is a bit
flying,
odd. Sure,
tapos
Cyrodiil could have loads of
infinite
potential right now.
fireworks.
We don't really know,
As long as
but
meron kang
they aren't
mana.
in a civil war over Tiber Septim yet, despite assassination attempts on their emperor being planned. So, how can we up the stakes to make the religious aspects of the Skyrim Civil War hit even harder? Well, the Thalmor hate Talos because he is a man-made god, a concept that infuriates them. The Thalmor hate humans in general, along with basically everyone that isn't them, and could thus also ban the worship of Shor. Shor has always been on the side of men, and against elves in the old Nordic myths. Potential Shrezarine, essentially mortal reincarnations of Shor, are pretty famous elf eradicators, including Pelennor Whitestrake, who has probably the most ridiculous elf kill count of anyone ever, and Eastramor. So there's a lot of reason for the Thalmor to make Shor public enemy number 2, behind Talos. But here's the kicker. Tiber Septim is rumoured to be a Shezarine. Well, at least one of his aspects is, and that link could be a reason for the Thalmor to ban Shor worship too, so there isn't a sneaky Talos worshipping loophole in the White Gold Concordat. I'm not 100% sure whether this Shrezarine link is only out of universe, but if it's not, then this is something that the Thalmor could look into. They are 100% petty enough. If the Lords of Skyrim had stuck to their heathen gods in-game, as Isa Raymond put it, this would have been a targeted double whammy that the Nords wouldn't be happy about taking. It would also be something that the Empire couldn't relate to, because they don't worship Shazar, the Imperial version, further forming a religious rift. The argument of, we both worship Talos, we both lost something, you're the one throwing a tantrum, suck it up and deal with it, wouldn't work anymore.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
I personally feel like this would have been a more natural way to give the Talos worship ban that extra religious oomph in the Skyrim Civil War, given the pre-established lore we are given about Nords and their gods in older games. It's not that Talos wouldn't be worshipped in Skyrim, that's not my point. My point is that a lot of old lore is being looked over to make this a big enough deal to start a civil war, and it feels a little disingenuous considering that Talos is an imperial god, and it's been established for at least a couple of games that he's a massive deal for the Empire. He's their founder and one of their most important figures. We've mentioned before that Ysmir is Talos' title, but is also treated as his Nordic aspect, and when we go back to that book in Morrowind, Varieties of Faith in the Empire, Talos is specifically worshipped as Ysmir. Because it doubles as a title, one that an old king shares, there's a loophole here for the Nords. They could say that they're praising an old Nord hero, King Ysmir Wolfhalf, when they say praise Ysmir, but they're actually giving their praise to Talos. I'm not convinced that Thalmor would actually fall for this, but that extra layer of deceit could save a few lives. But if Shor worship was banned, who is someone that the Nords should still be worshipping, considering the whole Sovngarde thing, there is no loophole around that.
I was
This
watching
could
4
be a
streams at
targeted
once,
attack
now I'm back to
from the
3.
Thalmor as part of the White Gold Concordat. A
Grabe,
similar
yung
thing
sipag
to
mo
what they
naman.
did to Hammerfell by
Sadya.
wanting to take a portion of its southern land. This caused Hammerfell to leave the Empire, and by banning Shor worship, this would feel like a targeted attack on Skyrim, one that would add that extra level of betrayal felt by the Nords while making the Civil War feel like it was a part of the Thalmor's designs, rather than a bit of a happy accident after a bunch of tensions. It would just be a bit more intentional. It would have also given everything even more impact. The disappearance of Shor worship in Skyrim infuriates it kind of feels like going to Disneyland and then pretending that Walt Disney never existed. It can't really be done. But this is all just the uneducated opinion of a guy trying to survive a terrible start to what will likely be another terrible year. I just feel like there was an extra layer with the religious side of Skyrim that Bethesda could have used, instead of a copy of a Bluehost religion. It needed an extra something special, an extra Skyrim pantheon, and the game that used this country as its setting took it away and changed the focus, which is a bit of a shame. People have still got the potential.
Oh, what's this? Ito ba yung ano? Ah, yung Fear Cloud. Okay.
So, do you guys agree with my takes, or do you just think I'm full of shite? Let me know, and if you liked this video, consider the YouTube reach and leave a like and commenting. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and see you soon.
Sisira mo na ba yung ano? Sisira mo pa ni Pops yung base to? Wala. North. Ay, hindi pa na.
I present to you Parthenax, our wise, scaly uncle, voiced by the legendary Charles Martinet, who's known for... Hold on a second. That's the guy who voiced Mario and Luigi.
Me, Mario.
He acts as one of the main mentor figures for the Dragonborn, and, in my mind, actually shows off some decent dialogue writing, something we don't really get much from in Skyrim. Still, Party Snacks over here is a dragon. And the entire point of the main quest is that we are built to
Wala,
slay
elab ko
dragons.
yan.
It was a pretty major gimmick for Skyrim when it released.
Joe.
And the final
Oh my
quest of the game's
God.
main story is literally called Dragon Slayer. And when Delphine uses all 2 of her brain cells to work out that Parthenax is the boss of the Greybeards, she demands that, although he is an ally, he must be slain. This starts the infamous quest, simply titled Parthenax, which presents us with a dilemma and an ultimatum. Although, in my mind, there shouldn't be much of a dilemma. And this video is going to serve as my TED Talk to convince you that telling Delphine to sod off is the best choice in this ultimatum. Yes, I know, it's not exactly a hot take, but maybe you guys can use it as an analytical way to tell people why Delphine is a big dum-dum. And a baby. A big baby.
Oh, big baby. Just get on with the game.
So let's roughly break down my argument into 4 different sections. 1 will be talking about the blades, and what benefits they can give you if you side with them, because Delphine offers an ultimatum where you essentially choose between them and the Greybeards. For 2, we will be talking about the logistical benefits of having Parthenax and the Greybeards as an ally, for both the Dragonborn and the rest of Skyrim. 3, we'll be breaking down the moralities and the intentions of each side of the dilemma, and why it's better to pick Parthenax. And finally, for 4, we'll be talking about why Parthenax's survival better suits the narrative, even though the overall narrative is a bit, stinky. So, let's kick things off with the blades and Delphine specifically. You see, Delphine is essentially taking the role of Grandmaster of the Blades. Now, I assume she didn't have this role before, since she probably would have been in her 20s when the Blades originally were forced to disband. So I guess she gave herself this role even though there are only 2 of them, so it's not that grand a role. But theoretically, she should be in a place with a little bit of authority. The problem is, she shouldn't have enough authority to command you. For context, the entire point of the Blades is to serve the Dragonborn, not the Emperor. For a long while, these 2 were essentially one and the same, but after Martin Septim delivered the Dragon Punch of the era, and perished in the process because, well, he's played by Sean Bean, so there was no Dragonborn Emperor. Even after we got a new set of emperors from the Mede dynasty taking over,
It
the
will
Blades did
job,
not take their place by the new royal family's side, instead
will.
remaining in their temples as an extra special force of a kind, waiting hopefully for the re-emergence of the Dragonborn. The Medes still needed an elite royal guard, and thus created the Penitus Oculatus, which kind of seems like a reference to the Praetorian Guard
Escape
of ancient Rome. Now you might be wondering why I'm giving you this lore dump. Well, Delphine is the one that offers you the ultimatum in the first place. Slay Parthenax, or all two blades will not serve you, and she shouldn't be able to do this while remaining true to the principles of the blades. They serve the Dragonborn, and if you don't want Parthenax to die, Delphine should have to respect that if she still wants to be called a blade. She also claims that the blades were once dragon slayers, which is only partially true. The blades are essentially a successor organisation to the Dragon Guard, and these guys were founded as a kind of elite fighting force serving Remin Cyrodiil, the founder of the Second Cyrodiilic Empire. The original Dragon Guard was made up of Akaviri invaders, who bent the knee upon discovering that Remin was a dragonborn, and thus apparently made a whole big deal about how Remin was the person they had been looking for this entire time and pledged to serve him. The Dragon Guard were essentially formed the day they bent the knee, following the conclusion of the Battle of the Pale Pass in 2704 of the First Era. Now Delphine talks about the Blades' main thing being dragon slaying, but if you look at them historically, that's not even the Dragon Guard's main thing. We don't have an exact date for when this happened, but the Dragon Guard went on a crusade to hunt some dragons toward the end of the First Era. The only date I do have is that of a single dragon slaying, being in 2871 of the First Era, courtesy of the Atlas of Dragons. And, if you're generous, you can slap a good 10 years either side to give you a rough estimate of when the Crusades took place. This is still over 150 years after the Dragon Guard began acting as Remin Cyrodiil's elite army, meaning that even the Dragon Guard's core purpose is to serve the Dragonborn. By giving you this ultimatum, Delphine is spitting in the face of thousands of years of tradition that she apparently holds in high regard. And for what? You can call Delphine's actions disrespectful at a minimum. She's disrespectful to you, the person she's meant to be serving, disrespectful to the Blades, the organisation she represents, and obviously disrespectful to the Greybeards. The thing is, her actions are also just stupid. If you're trying to revive the Blades with any form of genuine authenticity, you need the Dragonborn to do it. The Blades have been scattered by the Thalmor, hunted down following the signing of the White Gold Concordat, and if you want these hiding Blades to come out in force, they need a figure to rally behind to give them hope. That figure is the Dragonborn. Yet Delphine has put them in a position where they either have to do what she says, or she won't work with them. But that doesn't benefit her. If the Dragonborn decides not to fight Parthenax, what makes her organisation of two the real Blades? If there's a Dragonborn out there and you're not serving them, it's not a good look for you. What's to stop the Dragonborn from forming their own Blades by turning every housecar that works for them into one, thus forming a mightier organisation with more authenticity because they actually function with the Blade's core at heart, serving the Dragonborn. Delphine needs to realise that she has nothing without the Dragonborn. Before they came along, she was hiding in an inn, and that putting the Dragonborn in this position regarding Parthenax is against everything her organisation stands for and puts her right back where she started, except she now has Esbern for company. More than that, it takes away Delphine's security. If the Thalmor catch wind that Delphine and Esbern aren't helping the Dragonborn anymore, what's to stop them from marching on Skyhaven Temple and taking them out? At least with the Dragonborn you have a mightier weapon to keep your enemies at bay. She can't even recruit people without you, so when Delphine asks you to choose her Blades over Parthenax, what is she really offering? She's a middle-aged woman with decent connections, and Esbern is so old he coughs ash and farts dust. All they realistically give you is the location of dragons. Okay, cool, I guess. It's not like they turn up whenever I'm doing shopping or anything.
Leave me alone!
Now, all two of these Blades have pretty much used everything of self-worth by the time the Parthenax dilemma is presented, and are bargaining without a card in their hand. You, the Dragonborn, are their ace. They have nothing else. They've already given you all the information they can on trying to defeat Alduin, and they even recruit from a pool of people who already follow you, so it's not like you're getting more swords by your side, they're just getting fancier uniforms. So let's flip the script and talk about what Parthenax and the Greybeards give you. Truth be told, not much more from a gameplay standpoint. Following the defeat of Alduin, the Greybeards will give you the location of a word of power when asked, which is sort of useful, I guess. But a friend with an unlimited courier budget will do that too. Granted, this could be one of the Greybeards anyway. Now, Parthenax offers you the unique ability to meditate on a word of power, giving that word a certain boost and granting you a greater understanding. This is where the Greybeards show their benefit from more of a lore perspective. The Blades can only really offer you intel and swords at your side, but you can get both by just adventuring and joining other guilds. The Greybeards and Parthenax theoretically give you something that no one else can, further insight into the voice. Shouts are massively nerfed in-game compared to what they can do in the lore, and gaining further insight from Parthenax and co will only make the Last Dragonborn more powerful. The Blades can only improve the things around you, should you side with them, and even then you need to do the majority of the work, whereas the Greybeards and their scaly Shifu can improve you. They make you, the Last Dragonborn, even greater. Also, as a tiny side note, High Hrothgar is more secure than Skyhaven Temple. I know this doesn't happen in-game, but what's to stop the Forsworn from trying to take the place back while you're not there, or the Thalmor from taking Delphine and Esbern to the Cleaners? High Hrothgar is commonly considered sacred ground by practically everyone, and even if someone is stupid enough to attack you there, they'll quickly find that these old guys can throw hands. Play the clip. Now, the benefits of Parthenax do not end there. In the post-game, it's stated that Parthenax will attempt to impart the way of the voice onto other dragons. When you return to the throat of the world after blowing up Alduin, there are a bunch of dragons flying around the mountain top, and perhaps these are the ones who follow Parthenax now instead of Alduin. Odiving mentions that few will follow his tyranny of the way of the voice, but bear in mind that Odiving is very much a warrior. Being forced into a peaceful way of life probably would seem like tyranny to him. Although, even if a handful of dragons chill with Parthenax, that means a handful fewer are terrorizing Skyrim. Sure, you could do what the Blades want you to do and just turn them into a bunch of skeletons, but they have to be sighted first, and that usually means they have to cause some destruction to begin with. If these dragons are with Parthenax, that won't be a problem to begin with, and dragon-related casualties will go down. There's even a chance that they could become your willing allies in future, since Odiving is flying around the throat of the world. Think about it this way, if you have to choose between Delphine and Esbern and, dragons as allies, the dragons make more sense if you want to bring some firepower. See what I did there? That then leads us to our third section, all about the morality of the whole thing, including who has better intentions for the Dragonborn and Tamriel as a whole, and who would actually be the better moral choice. As far as intentions for the rest of the continent are involved, the Blades actually take the edge here. I know, shocking. You see, the Greybeards, including Parthenax, are pretty go-with-the-flow kind of people. They follow the tides of destiny, along with the will of Apatosh and Kinrath. I mean, it should be kind, which I cover in this video here, but this sort of explains why they're so impartial about everything. They're sticking around for personal enlightenment through the way of the voice, and don't care much for the affairs of Skyrim, Tamriel, the Empire, or the Thalmor. This is something that Delphine is right about. They only act to save the world from Alduin because you ask. And, as they are tasked with being your advisor, they, somewhat reluctantly, aid you with learning Dragonrend and setting up a whole peace council. It's implied that if you hadn't pushed this agenda, the Greybeards would have been perfectly fine with letting Alduin eat the world. The Blades, on the other hand, actively want to save the world from Alduin and stand against the Thalmor, who are Ultima supremacists wanting to subjugate the rest of Tamriel and probably do some reality rewriting. So you can't fault Delphine and Esbern's intentions. They truly want to help Tamriel, and they genuinely believe they're doing the right thing and are aids to the world. So give yourselves a pat on the back, Blades, I guess. All two of you. Unfortunately, this isn't the case when it comes to the last Dragonborn specifically. While she calls you Dragonborn as a form of somewhat reverence, we've already established that Delphine doesn't really treat you like one. She wants to command you, not guide you. And while Esbern isn't as bad, he's not the boss, so it's kind of not all that relevant. The thing is, if you do slay Parthenax because of Delphine's ultimatum, what does it mean for you? She sends you to recruit people. She sends you to slay dragons. She sends you on missions during the main quest, like with the Thalmor embassy and finding Esbern. She wants to command you as a soldier, or at least as a weapon, and that isn't saying to me that Delphine wants what's best for us. She wants to use us, and this isn't the dynamic the Blades and the Dragonborn are meant to have. This is the complete opposite when it comes to Parthenax and the Greybeards. They simply act as advisors, to the point of doing so against their own principles. Delphine claims that the Greybeards would simply want you to be like them, but Arengir states that you, as the last Dragonborn, are above the way of the voice, and essentially have better things to do. If you say to him that you'll follow the way of the voice, he'll even go out of his way to tell you that you shouldn't let it get in the way of your duties as a Dragonborn, although he does call it commendable. While clearly angered by your learning about the Dragonren shout, and uncomfortable about hosting a peace treaty with all the outsiders coming to High Hrothgar, Arengir and his bearded boys still do it, because that's their role. They, alongside Parthenax, simply wish to challenge you philosophically, and guide you on your road to destiny. Parthenax, in particular, wishes to challenge you philosophically, and seems to hold no secrets. He is honest with you from the get-go, and answers any questions you have directly. Delphine is a bit more mysterious and less direct, which is fair considering that she is hiding from the Thalmor, but, given her treatment of you throughout the main story, she comes across as someone who would keep secrets from you if it benefited her. Parthenax feels like he has far less to hide, and he doesn't try to command you. He talks and treats you as if you were another dragon, and it does feel like he enjoys having conversations with you, which is just, well, nice. Then we get into the grander ordeal, the general morality of it all. You see, Delphine comes to you about wanting Parthenax dead, and says you'll get no aid from her unless the deed is done, which can be proposed before Alduin is defeated. If you talk to Delphine or Esbern after the Alduin's main quest, but before Alduin's defeated, they will slap you with this ultimatum, and this is horrible timing, because the world could be very well ending soon, and you'd logically think that this would be the time to do everything you could to help, not hinder the Dragonborn. Instead, Delphine and Esbern think to themselves, yeah, let's make the Dragonborn choose between two of his closest allies on the tipping point of a conflict that could very well end the world. It's not even like she's being reactive. Delphine is the aggressor in this situation, and putting yourself in a position where you refuse to offer the Dragonborn any aid when they are at a pivotal point in their journey to defeating Alduin is irresponsible, selfish, and quite frankly, a bitch move. But what are her reasons for wanting Parthenax to become a display at the Natural History Museum? Well, you can hear it from Delphine herself.
He was the right hand of Alduin. He committed atrocities so infamous they are still remembered thousands of years later.
She then justifies leaving you out to dry by saying,
until he's dead. I'm sorry, but we would dishonor our oaths as blades if we continue to help you.
Let me break down why both these quotes are dumb, plain and simple. You see, it is true that Parthenax was Alduin's right-hand man, and did some pretty infamously terrible things, but it was a very long time ago. Do you want to know how long ago it was? Well, the Dragon Wars were in the late Merithic era, and depending on when Parthenax betrayed Alduin, these atrocities of his would have been between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. For context, since became an island, the Dragon Wars ended, the Alessian Empire in Cyrodiil was founded, the Dwemer vanished, the Kaimer became the Dunmer, the Red Guards came to Tamriel, the Empire fell, an invasion from Akavir happened, another empire was founded, every single guild was made, the Second Empire fell, everything in ESO happened, Talos came along to make yet another empire, every other Elder Scrolls game happened, including the card game and the mobile one, and then, finally, we're at Skyrim. I just rattled off a very rudimentary timeline that covers events spanning across close to 3/4 of Tamriel's entire history. Since Parthenax did his atrocities, 3 entire eras have come and gone since then, and we haven't even mentioned how Parthenax made up for his atrocities in the first place. He taught humanity to use the voice to fight Alduin, and without him, Alduin would have been the victor of the Dragon Wars. Now, when Delphine states that he's a traitor who could betray us to fight for Alduin, Parthenax proves her wrong. He had his chance to betray you at the throat of the world when we came back from the past. Instead, he fights by our side against Alduin, and while he doesn't celebrate Alduin's Big Bang, he acknowledges that it had to be done. Then there's the whole thing about the Blade's Oath, which is wrong on so many levels. Oh, this woman drives me mad and she's not even real. Okay, so Delphine is a Blade, and the Blades have never been Dragon Slayers. That responsibility came from the organisation predating them, the Dragon Guard, meaning that you shouldn't even have a Dragon Slaying Oath to begin with. It's older than your entire organisation. But even if she's calling on the Dragon Guard's oath, their main job is to serve the Dragonborn. That is their oath. The Akaviri sail to another continent to apparently find the Dragonborn and serve them, and they made the Dragon Guard. Joffrey and his boys served Martin Septim as the Dragonborn, even though he was essentially just some random priest with no qualifications for the role other than his blood. It's a similar situation to us. Sure, you guys can make your own stories behind your Dragonborn. We're just some random dude or dudette that got caught on the border to Skyrim at the wrong place in the wrong time, and yet the Blades should still follow us. That is the point of the Blades. Serve the one with the dragon blood, not put them in stupid ultimatums. Delphine, if this is the route you want to go down, you might as well join the Companions. They have a quest where they slay dragons for glory, and that's apparently all you care about, not the main role you're meant to fulfill as a Blade. Serve the Dragonborn. Just go bin yourself. Hop in a bin, get picked up by the Reachborough Council, and fuck off. We can just put Esbern in a care home, I guess.
It's a secret service, blah, blah, blah. We don't tell us shit. We're a couple of fucking toy soldiers. Do this, John. Do that, John. Kill your fucking sister, John!
Now, on to the final part, which will mainly talk about the narrative, but we'll mention some points about morality here and there as well. Now, in my mind, the main quest and the DLCs of Skyrim have their own narrative themes. They aren't that well written, but it does look like there was an attempt. The theme of the main quest is about defying nature and destiny, at least in my eyes. We are meant to be the last Dragonborn. Alduin is meant to eat and thus end the world. He's apparently done it before, and he will apparently do it again. Yet we, in defiance of fate and destiny, stop him. We use something that shouldn't exist, a break in time, to get the deed done. And who is the one that tells us how to do this? Parthenax, someone who has defied his nature and destiny to become something stronger. According to the etchings on the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar, Parthenax took pity on mankind, and was thus chosen by Kain to help humanity learn the power of the Thu'um. Kain was the goddess who gave humanity the power to use the Thu'um in the first place, and of everyone she could have chosen, she chose Parthenax to teach humanity how to use her gift. Kain must have seen something in Parthenax to have chosen him in the first place, and he still follows the way of the voice in her name to this day. Parthenax himself states that this way of peace he has adopted is against his nature. If his name, the three words that make up his name mean ambition, overlord, and cruelty. His exact words on this are
Dov Walan Fahrel. We were made to dominate. The will to power is in our blood. You feel it in yourself, do you not?
Another thing to note is that Parthenax is not following a way of life he invented and asking others to follow suit. While he taught Nords the Thu'um in the Merithic era, the Way of the Voice came later, in the First era, founded by Jurgen Windcaller, meaning that the Greybeards chose Parthenax as their leader, and he adopted this way of life to better himself. He's not the same dragon that served Alduin. He's wiser, he's better, and he sees the value in humanity. He has overcome his nature and destiny given by Akatosh, even though it is a struggle for him, and this type of nuance is something that Delphine can't understand, because she sees things as black and white. Parthenax is a dragon, therefore he must be slain. That's her reasoning. That's really all there is to it. Yet Parthenax himself gives you the perfect counter, and in many ways demonstrates his wisdom. This is what he has to say.
I have overcome my nature only through meditation and long study of the way of the voice. What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort?
Thank you for watching what is essentially amounted to a researched hate piece on Delphine and a propaganda piece on Parthenax. It's not the most unbiased thing I've ever made, but from where I'm looking, Delphine doesn't really have legs to stand on. No one likes being told what to do, especially by someone who doesn't have authority over you, and that's what Delphine tries to do. You should be her boss, not the other way around. I'm unsure if Bethesda wanted people to see this as a 50-50 debate, or put it in as a sort of evil option, because the main quest only really lets you be a hero. While Todd and crew have proven very effective at Elder Scrolls world building, storytelling and dialogue isn't their strong suit. Having said that, Parthenax has some of the best dialogue in all of Skyrim, consistently, in my opinion. And if everything I've said thus far isn't enough for you, that can be another reason to keep him alive. I doubt he'd tell you to like, comment and subscribe to my videos, but I'm more shameless than he is. So please do all that, and hopefully I'll see you in another video.
Bells on the docks, they cry out for the mortal day. And winds sing the dirge for the words we never could say. And sails fly at half-mast in the color of evening swoon. And tears break the silence for the children we almost knew. When dawn kissed the ocean from the golden light came our birth, and when dusk falls on the harbor, to the golden shores we will return.
A couple of weeks ago, I did a video on Talos, covering the strangeness of his worship in Skyrim, although I didn't cover much about Talos himself, and the strangeness that is his general existence. Everything around his lore is just really strange, and I see Talos as a sort of gateway into exploring the weirder aspects of Elder Scrolls lore, since he is a big feature in both Oblivion and Skyrim, yet we don't get told that much about him overtly in either game, and a significant chunk of his lore actually comes from Daggerfall and Morrowind. The Elder Scrolls' lore is probably a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing. If you've only played Skyrim and didn't look too deep into the entire universe, you'd probably think that the world of Elder Scrolls is pretty by the numbers as fantasy universes go, but let me tell you now that this is not the case. And there is so much world building in this series that contradicts itself. This is partially because most information we're given is purely in-universe, and thus coloured by the biases of characters in the world writing books. This is also due to retcons and oversights by Bethesda, but all of these contradictions are sort of true at the same time, with an in-universe phenomenon that can make several contradicting things true at once, called dragon breaks. It's all confusing, and I'm going to use Talos as my gateway to hopefully show some of you how delightfully and frustratingly strange it all is. So let's take a closer look at the man who became a divine, starting with his early life. Now, straight away, we have a problem. You see, the man who eventually becomes Tiber Septim has two different origin stories. An orthodox, which people in-universe commonly accept, and a heretical telling that goes against this orthodox tale. The two tellings largely have the same main events, but different takes on those events. The problem is, they don't agree on Tiber Septim's original name. The heretical telling says that he was a man named Hjalti Earlybeard from High Rock, born in the city of Alcair. Some say he was a Nord, while others say he was a Breton. Truth be told, he could have been both, but with a name like Hjalti Earlybeard, he probably had some Nord heritage in there somewhere. The Orthodox version says his birth name was Talos, and that he was from the continent of Atmora. This doesn't make a lot of sense, since Atmora has been a dead frozen wasteland since the First Era, and Talos would have been born at the end of the Second Era. The narrative could have been introduced retroactively to add divinity into Talos' early life, since he has the gift of the voice, and Morahouse, the son of Kain, came from Atmora to help liberate humanity from the elves. Morahouse was known as the Breath of Kain, with powerful Thule, and perhaps those at the Empire's propaganda machine wanted people to make that link, adding a sprinkling of divinity right from the very start. Either way, Hjalti was most likely Tiber Septim's birth name, since the ghostly Crowdan Inn mistakes you, the Dragonborn, as his old war-body Hjalti, and asks you to grab his sword. Since Tiber Septim was a Dragonborn, Bethesda probably intended for this to be evidence that Tiber Septim was once Hjalti. Idis, the innkeeper, even references this, saying,
Hjalti? I never heard of anyone named Hjalti. Tiber Septim had many names. Maybe that's one of them.
So, if Hjalti was born in Alcair, all the way in High Rock, how come one of his old war buddies is haunting an inn in Skyrim? Well, both a heretical and orthodox story states that Hjalti came to the Falkreath region to do some warring. I don't call Falkreath a hold because at the time, the area was part of the Colovian Estates, not Skyrim, and he found himself under the service of the region's petty king, Cuchulainn. Serving as Cuchulainn's general, Hjalti found himself able to unify Cyrodiil, but first he had to deal with some pesky reachmen, who were basically the precursors of the Forsworn. So he got some lads together and went to crush the fort of Hroldan. Now it's all sounding relatively simple. Well, here lies another divergence point between the two versions. The orthodox story simply states that he waltzed over with a slipper in hand and slapped those Richmond silly with his tactical genius. He was then summoned by the Greybeards, in a similar fashion to how the last Dragonborn was, presumably because he used the Thune to take Fort Hroldan. Then he made it up the not 7,000 steps, someone counted, got shouted at, and was crowned Ysmir, Dragon of the North. Under Cuchulainn, he led an army, and faced the armies of High Rock and Cyrodiil. With some shouts here and some clever tactics there, the people of Skyrim realised that Hjalti was Dragonborn, and said, "Actually, we like you now, we'll fight for you." The Bretons were then captured, Hjalti got the Amulet of Kings, and the Imperial City soon fell, with Cuchulainn crowned Emperor, and Talos as his general. The heretical version is a bit more confusing, and introduces a new character, High King Wulfharth. Wulfharth, much like Daenerys, has about 1,000 names, one of which is Ysmir. Now, Ysmir was an incredibly powerful Nordic hero, born Natmora, who came to Skyrim at the start of the First Era and fought the original Indral Nerevar. He was elected High King by Amut and was said to be Dragonborn, at least according to Jarl Bargroth, and, in his first life, was famous with an altercation with Alduin, which involved everyone turning into children and then Wolfhalf sort of just exploding afterward. But strangely, he's actually more famous for fighting the Kai'mer and the Dwemer. This culminated in the Battle of the Red Mountain. Now, the Battle of the Red Mountain has so many different versions, but we're going to focus on the Nord side of it, since we're looking at a Nordic king. At this point, Wolfhalf had been dead for over 100 years, and after Thorin Dagoth, who later got resurrected as Dagoth convinced the Nords it was time to reclaim the heart of Shor at the Red Mountain, they used the Thum to resurrect the ghost of Shor in an attempt to reclaim his heart. Shor gathered an army, which included orcs for some reason, and resurrected Wolfhalf as his general, and made him the Ash King. Shor and his crew attacked the Red Mountain, but after a myriad of shenanigans, which included the non-permanent deaths of Dagoth and Indral Nerevar, the Dwemer vanishing, and I think Jurgen Windcaller having their crisis over there, Shor got the Red Mountain thrown on top of him, and Wolfhalf got turned back into ash. This was because Dagoth betrayed the Nords, and Kain lifted up Wolfhalf's ashes as a reminder not to trust Myr ever again. According to this version of the story, the heart of Shor wasn't at the Red Mountain, but this probably wasn't true, since the heart was apparently the reason the Dwemer disappeared, which technically concluded the Battle of the Red Mountain. It's all a bit odd, but the main thing you need to take away is that, while this is Wolfhalf's second death, he doesn't remain dead for long pretty much ever.
Saan kaya ako
Instead of being an
makakita ng
Ash King,
cactus?
he becomes a storm, the Grey Wind, sometimes known as the Storm of Kain, and represents the goddess's wrath. He could thus be summoned from Sovngarde, which was done by either Yoren Skald King, Almalexia, who he hates because he despises the Tribunal, or the Greybeards before ESO, to help against the Nakaviri invasion. He had the title of Underking at this point, and was later reawakened from Sovngarde again, this time by a prophecy from the Greybeards that a new emperor would turn up to defeat the Myr and rule Tamriel. Wolfhalf, with his blazing hatred of the Tribunal and elves in general, went to High Hrothgar to see if it was him, apparently with a body again. Unfortunately, he was not that guy, and the Greybeard shouted him to ash again. Now, you may be wondering why I went on a rant about Wolfhalf, but stay with me here, it's all relevant, we're getting there. In the heretical story, Wolfhalf came to Hjalti after searching for the one the Greybeards were really looking for, since he really did want those elves gone. This was when Hjalti was taking Fort Hroldan, and Wolfhalf turned up as the Grey Wind to give him a hand. He protected Hjalti from arrows with his winds, struck down foes with lightning, and the young Dragonborn used his voice to throw his enemies from the walls. From then on, the Nords dubbed him Hjalti Talos, with Talos meaning storm crown. The rest of the story goes the same way as the Orthodox one, except Hjalti has Wolfhalf raining down lightning on his foes. It should also be noted that there is another major player that does a lot more later, but is worth mentioning now. Surin Arctus, who is a battle mage and tactician, also working for King Kudake. He is also known as Unarmed the Fox, which you'll need to remember for later. Heresy and Orthodoxy don't diverge again until Zurin Arctus and Tiber Septim form a sort of trio to get stuff done. But Wolfhalf is from an older era and is frothing at the mouth to get some conquering done. At this moment, Tiber is playing it safe, with Skyrim, Hyrok and Cyrodiil in his Imperial basket, eyeing Hammerfell next to complete the human section of Tamriel. Tiber explores the losing side of a civil war to take the land of the Redguards, then sets his eyes on Morrowind next. According to the heretical version, Wolfhalf is said to be the big gun, now that Tiber is without his voice, and even the might of the godly tribunal isn't enough, with Morrowind surrendering, giving the old king at least some vengeance. The problem is, it's not enough for Wolfhalf, since he wants total domination, while Tiber Septim is more interested in getting Morrowind's ebony and his hands on the Numidium. The Dunmer were relatively okay with giving this up, especially because the Heart of Shore had gone missing and the Numidium was practically a shell without it. In exchange, the Dunmer were made part of the Empire but allowed to continue with relative autonomy. Not being too happy about this, Wolfhalf stormed off on a wolf huff, and without that raging storm, Talos lacked his main weapon to deal with the rest of Tamriel. Now, sure, he was never going to conquer Black Marsh properly, because if you're not Argonian, you can't really survive in there, but the outer regions could be conquered, and because that made up Black Marsh's border, you can technically just say job done, so that was never going to be a problem. The problems instead arose in the form of Outma mages, Bosma cannibals, and angry cats. So Tiber and Zurin got a plan together to try and make the Numidium work without the Heart of Shore, especially because Valenwood formed a pact with the Somerset Isles, which is something the pair usually do a lot. This is where we diverge yet again, but before we do, I need to make a quick note. From my research, I couldn't find a mention of Wolfhalf at all in the Orthodox telling of this story. Talos was known for summoning storms with his Thune, and maybe that was Wolfhalf in the Orthodox version, but it's not overt. So when Tiber and Zurin go to make the Numidium tick in the Orthodox story, the Battle Mage puts his own heart and thus life force into a gem called the Mantella, as a sort of alternative battery to the Heart of Lorcan. He also creates the Totem of Tiber Septim, so that Tiber and those of his bloodline could control the Numidium, and with his giant mech, it was time to conquer. Before long, all of Tamriel was part of the new empire, and Tiber had done what no one else had done before. He had fulfilled the Greybeard's prophecy. Now this isn't too different from the heretical telling, but instead of Zurin's heart being the power source, Tiber recalled Wolfhalf to tell the old High King he was right all along, and that conquering was back on the menu. He then seized him, somehow, and stuffed his soul in the Mantella to power the Numidium. Then Tiber Septim conquered Tamriel, blah blah blah, but you might be wondering why the Numidium ended up here instead of being a Jaeger watching over the Imperial City forevermore. Well, the official story goes that Tiber Septim, not having to worry about the Geneva Convention because Switzerland's not a thing in Tamriel, decided to use his Gundam to crush some neutral ruling families throughout Tamriel. But some random rotting undead wizard called the Underking lays the beatdown on the Numidium, and the pair KO each other, with the Dwemer mech going out of commission while the Underking becomes a weird half-dead lich thing and the poster boy for Daggerfall. Yep, that's him there, and the Mantella vanishes too. But then another question arises. How did the Underking defeat, or at least draw with, the Numidium? This was meant to be the Dwemer's ultimate weapon, a creation powerful enough to conquer all of Tamriel. It is an artificial god that can rewrite reality. Well, this is where we diverge yet again, since it depends on whether you think Zurin Arctus or Wolfhalf is powering the Gypsy Danger over it.
That there, right in the southern counties welterweight champion. He is of mixed religion, therefore he is godless. He was adopted by Satan himself before he was returned out of fear of his awkwardness. But he is impossible value due to his lethal dimensions. His mother, terrified, just abandoned. And there he stood before you like the burst of some brand mollusk species.
If you believe it was Zurin, the Battle Mage becomes so disgusted by Tiber Septim's war crimes that he attempts to reclaim his life force, his heart, from the Mantella. Instead, the gem was blown into Aetherius, and Zurin Arctus became an undead lich. If you believe it was Wolfhalf, well, we have to rewind a bit.
It's rewind time.
While Zurin did manage to put the old High King in the Mantella in this version of the story, it burned a hole in his chest, and Wolfhalf was once again ash. This combination powered the Numidium until the Rotting Wizard came out of nowhere to destroy the mech, which, as it could have potentially been the Underking, it could have also been Wolfhalf. Yeah, it's all confusing. This has led to people sort of being unsure of who the Underking in Daggerfall really is. It could be Zurin Arctus, it could be Wolfhalf, it could be a combination of the two, but we're not really sure. You might be wondering how someone like Zurin could even power the Numidium to begin with, since I talked about how powerful the thing is, and thus lead to the Underking being Wolfhalf because of his past and power. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Zurin is a Shezareen, a mortal reincarnation of the dead god Shor. His other name, Anand the Fox, is a hint to this, since Shor's animal form in the Old Nordic pantheon was a fox, and this is the form that he apparently appeared to Ysgramor in. This divine power would make sense as to why he can power the Numidium, since Shor's heart was originally used to power it, and thus the heart of his mortal incarnation could theoretically prove to be a decent replacement. Still, with his enemies conquered and Tamriel his to rule, it should get simpler from here on, right? Tiber Septim then rules for over 40 years, leads Tamriel into a golden age, dies at the ripe old age of 108, with his grandson taking over as the next emperor, before Akatosh raises him to be a divine on his death. Nice and simple. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Except, I wouldn't squeeze the lemon just yet. The road to divinity is often more complicated than that, and Tiber Septim's road in particular is, well, convoluted. In the Elder Scrolls, the process of becoming a god is known as apotheosis, and the methods of achieving apotheosis are known as the 6 walking ways. Now, annoyingly, there's some evidence that Tiber Septim walked literally all of these ways to become a god. For the most part, I'm assuming he became a proper god upon his death, but there's some evidence that Tiber displayed some godlike powers in his life, although this is according to quite a dubious source. Apparently, Tiber Septim achieved Kim, a form of apotheosis, to reshape Cyrodiil from a jungle, which is what it was like before the Elder Scrolls 4, to what we get in Oblivion. Granted, this comes from Mankar Camoran, who is such a nutter that he pisses almond milk and poops chunky peanut butter, so take this with a lot of salt. It's also an example of Elder Scrolls games getting in the way of their own lore by contradicting what was already set by prior games. This is very common throughout the series. Still, if we include both his life and subsequent death, we're gonna have to look at all the walking ways if we're trying to figure out how Tiber Septim became a god. So, let's go through them. Walking Way 1 is known as the Numidium, which Vivek called the wrong walking path, followed by Daggerfall. Essentially, because the Numidium is an artificial god, you can use it as a cheat code to become a god yourself. You don't even need the Heart of Shore for it, since this dude, Manimarco, used the Mantella to achieve apotheosis. Apparently, Wolfhalf achieved apotheosis this way as well, and we'll get into why this concerns Talos later. Then there's Walking Way 2, the Endeavour, which is just about being a hero Chad, putting in some elbow grease and coming out the other end a god. The Nerevarine and Indral Nerevar are examples of this, according to Vivek. And according to Michael Kirkbride, Hjalti was an example of this too. Way number 3 is the Prolix Tower, where you use speech and writing to manipulate the earth gods, essentially the rules of reality. This is what the Dweller were trying to do with tonal magic, and what the Thune does as well. Smear, which includes the last Dragonborn, Wolfhalf, and Hjalti, walked this path. Way number 4 is Kim, which we mentioned before, and is essentially what happens when you understand the truth of the universe and your place in it. It's kind of like breaking the fourth wall. Now number 5 is the Enantiomorph, where a pair of souls essentially combine to form a new whole, and thus something greater. We'll put a pin in this for now, since we'll have to go into it in detail later, but Talos will probably use this too. And finally, way 6, the Scarab. It is named after this little beetle because the process is similar to how scarabs collect a bunch of dung into a ball. This technically concerns Tiber Septim, since he was a Dragonborn Emperor and one of the Android kings, thus contributing to the Oversoul, a collection of Emperor souls since Alessia, essentially meaning that these emperors walked this way, and this is why there's a bit of confusion on my part. To become the god Talos, there's some evidence that Tiber Septim walked all these ways to achieve apotheosis. Now, you might be asking, wait, what about way 1? You mentioned Wolfhalf but not Talos. Well, that concerns way 5, and things are about to get even more confusing. You see, it is commonly believed that the god that is Talos is not just Tiber Septim or Hjalti Earlybeard, or whatever you want to call him. It also involves Zurin Arctus and Wolfhalf, using the 5th walking way, Enantiomorph. So, how does this walking way work? Well, it involves 2 people and a catalyst coveted by both. 2 individuals enter an Enantiomorph, and one emerges as the victor. Vivek claims that he was a witness to when the Nerevarine and Dagoth walked this way, and when the Nerevarine emerged victorious, they achieved apotheosis. Zurin Arctus and Tiber Septim are said to be the most famous example of this, and since we worship Talos, not Zurin, it's safe to say that Tiber emerged victorious. But wait, how does Wolfhalf fit into all of this? Well, because of the whole nonsense with the Mantella, he and Zurin could have gone through an Enantiomorph, since Wolfhalf previously had the title of the Under King, and if Zurin is the Under King in Daggerfall, he would share that title with the old High King. It's assumed that Zurin was the victor, and if another Enantiomorph happened with Tiber Septim after, this means that the god Talos is actually made up of 3 people, Hjalti Earlybeard, Zurin Arctus, and the High King Wolfhalf. This is my understanding of this all, and to be honest, it's all needlessly confusing.